Picture the moment just before dawn, when the Mediterranean stretches endless and glass-smooth beneath a pewter sky. Far below the surface, where sunlight fades to memory, something waits in the darkness. Stone foundations rest in perfect silence, their edges softened by millennia of salt water and sediment. Fish dart between what were once doorways. Seaweed sways through windows that once framed human faces watching the horizon. The ocean holds secrets in its deepest chambers, and perhaps the greatest secret of all is this: Atlantis may not have been alone. For over 2 millennia, humanity has been captivated by Plato's tale of a mighty island civilization that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night. We've searched every corner of the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, even the Black Sea, seeking traces of this lost world. But what if we've been thinking too small? What if Atlantis wasn't a singular catastrophe, but merely one chapter in a much larger story? A story written in salt water and stone, preserved in the ocean's vast archives? The tides that roll across our planet's coastlines today carry whispers of older shores. Beneath every wave lies the possibility of discovery, the chance that our next dive might reveal not just one lost city, but evidence of an entire forgotten age when the world's geography looked nothing like the maps we know today. Consider this. During the last ice age, sea levels stood nearly 400 feet lower than they do now. Vast continental shelves that today lie submerged were then dry land, home to rivers, forests, and perhaps civilizations. When the ice began to melt some 20,000 years ago, these lands didn't disappear gradually. They vanished in surges, in catastrophic floods that could swallow entire regions in decades or even years. The mathematics of loss are staggering. If we accept that early humans naturally gravitated toward coastlines, following rivers to their mouths, establishing ports where land met sea, then the greatest concentration of ancient settlements would have been precisely where we can no longer see them. They rest now beneath hundreds of feet of water, their stories locked in darkness. Modern archaeology has only just begun to pierce this veil. With each passing year, new technologies reveal more traces of humanity's drowned past. Side-scan sonar maps the contours of ancient riverbeds. Submersibles equipped with cameras explore stone structures that predate recorded history. And with each discovery, the same haunting question resurfaces. If these ruins exist, how many more remain hidden? The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface, yet we have explored less than 20% of its depths. In that vast unknown, entire chapters of human history may wait in silence. Cities that once echoed with the voices of merchants and children, temples that once rang with ceremony and prayer, harbors that once welcomed ships from distant shores, all preserved in the ocean's cold embrace. This is not merely the story of Atlantis. This is the story of Atlantis as prologue, the opening note of a symphony we are only beginning to hear. The waves that whisper against today's shores may be carrying messages from dozens of lost civilizations, each with its own tale of rise and fall, each waiting for the moment when humanity finally learns to listen to the ocean's deeper voice. The story begins, as so many profound mysteries do, in ancient Athens. Around 360 BCE, the philosopher Plato was nearing the end of his life when he penned 2 dialogues that would haunt human imagination for millennia, the Timaeus and the unfinished Critias. Within these works, he introduced the world to Atlantis, not as a casual tale told at a symposium, but as a detailed account presented with the gravity of historical fact. According to Plato's careful narrative, the story came through a chain of witnesses that stretched back 9,000 years before his own time. Solon, Athens' great lawgiver, had traveled to Egypt, where priests at Sais shared with him records preserved since antiquity. These priests spoke of a civilization that had flourished on an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, maritime empire larger than Libya and Asia combined. The Atlanteans, as Plato described them, had built a society of unprecedented sophistication. Their capital city was laid out in perfect concentric circles, with alternating rings of land and water. Canals connected the rings, allowing ships to sail from the sea directly to the city's heart. The palace at its center was adorned with gold, silver, and the mysterious metal orichalcum, which gleamed like fire. But this was not merely a tale of prosperity. Plato's Atlantis was a cautionary story about the corruption of power. The Atlanteans, he explained, had once been noble and virtuous, blessed by the sea god, Poseidon himself. Over generations, however, their divine nature faded as they intermarried with mortals. Pride replaced wisdom, conquest replaced justice, and when they finally dared to wage war against Athens itself, the gods delivered swift punishment. In a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, Atlantis vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind only an impassable muddy sea. For most scholars, this narrative structure provides the key to understanding Plato's true purpose. The story, they argue, was never meant as history, but as philosophical allegory, thought experiment designed to illustrate the ideal state by contrasting it with its corrupted opposite. The precise details, the specific timeline, even the elaborate geography were all inventions, literary devices in service of a deeper lesson about the rise and fall of civilizations. This interpretation has dominated academic discourse for good reason. Plato was, after all, famous for his use of allegory, from the shadows on the cave wall to the ring of Gyges. Why should Atlantis be different? Moreover, the story appears nowhere else in ancient literature before Plato, and even his student Aristotle dismissed it as a useful fiction, noting that the man who created it also destroyed it. Yet beneath this scholarly consensus, questions persist like underwater currents. Why would Plato, who typically crafted elegant parables, burden this particular allegory with such exhaustive detail? The Critias contains precise measurements of the city's layout, detailed descriptions of its agriculture and military organization, even specifications for its harbors and naval facilities. These specifics serve no obvious philosophical purpose indeed. They often interrupt the flow of Plato's moral argument. More intriguingly, the chain of transmission Plato describes from Egyptian priests to Solon to Critias involves real historical figures whose travels and interests are independently documented. Solon did visit Egypt, and he was known for his fascination with ancient traditions. The priests at Sais did maintain extensive records, many of which have since been lost. Alternative researchers have seized upon these details, arguing that Plato was not creating a fiction, but preserving a genuine historical memory, perhaps garbled by centuries of transmission, certainly embellished in the telling, but rooted in actual events. They point to his repeated insistence that the story is true, to his apparent frustration at being unable to complete the Critias, to the way certain details of Atlantean society echo archaeological discoveries made long after Plato's death. The puzzle deepens when we consider the context of Plato's time. The 4th century BCE was an era of expanding geographical knowledge, when Greek explorers were pushing beyond the Mediterranean into the Atlantic. If Plato were inventing Atlantis purely as allegory, why place it in a real location that his contemporaries might eventually explore and find empty? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between literal history and pure fiction. Perhaps Plato had access to genuine fragments of ancient tradition stories of drowned lands, lost civilizations, great floods, and wove them together into a narrative that served both as historical possibility and philosophical warning. This interpretation gains weight when we consider that Atlantis was not unique in ancient tradition. Similar tales of advanced civilizations destroyed by flood appear in cultures around the world, from the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh to Hindu accounts of Dvipa kingdoms swallowed by the sea. Could these diverse traditions preserve echoes of real events, memories of an age when the world's coastlines looked vastly different than they do today? As we stand at the threshold of deeper exploration, Plato's puzzle remains as compelling as ever. Whether Atlantis was history or allegory may matter less than what the story reveals about humanity. Us relationship with the sea, our awareness, even in ancient times, that the ocean both gives and takes, a way that civilizations rise and fall like tides. And that beneath the waves lie secrets we are only beginning to fathom. Across the ancient world, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, storytellers gathered audiences around fires and began tales that shared a haunting similarity. In Mesopotamia, they spoke of Utnapishtim and his great boat. Egyptian scribes recorded the tears of Ea that flooded the earth. Hindu texts described cosmic deluges that ended entire ages. Norse skalds sang of Ragnarok's drowning waters. From the Aborigines of Australia to the Maya of Central America, from the Hopi of the American Southwest to the Yoruba of West Africa, nearly every culture on Earth preserves some version of the same story. A time when waters rose and covered the land, when humanity faced extinction, when only the wise or fortunate survived to begin the world anew. For most of recorded history, these flood myths were understood as moral teaching stories about divine judgment, human frailty, or the cycles of creation and destruction that govern the cosmos. But as our understanding of Earth's climate history has deepened, a more intriguing possibility has emerged. What if these stories aren't purely mythological? What if they preserve actual memories of catastrophic flooding that occurred at the end of the last ice age? The timeline is compelling. Most flood myths, when they provide chronological details, place their events in a deep past that corresponds roughly to the period between 15,000 and 70 years ago, precisely when massive ice sheets were melting and sea levels were rising across the globe. The geographic distribution is equally suggestive. Flood stories are most common in coastal regions and river deltas, exactly where rising seas would have had the greatest impact on human populations. Consider the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest known literary work. The flood narrative within it describes not just rain, but the breaking of underground springs and the failure of dikes, details that suggest intimate familiarity with actual flood conditions. The story specifies that the flood lasted 7 days and nights, after which the survivor's boat came to rest on a mountain peak. These specifics seem oddly practical for a purely mythological account. Similarly, Hindu texts describe the flood of Manu with geographical precision, placing it in regions that modern geology confirms were indeed submerged as sea levels rose. The Matsya Purana speaks of the Pralaya, a cosmic deluge that periodically destroys the world, but it does so with details that sound more like eyewitness testimony than religious symbolism. The gradual rise of waters, the desperate migration of peoples to higher ground, the preservation of seeds and knowledge for future generations. Aboriginal Australian traditions are particularly intriguing because they include remarkably accurate descriptions of landscapes that have been underwater for more than 10,000 years. Dreamtime stories from the coast describe the formation of islands, the flooding of river valleys, and the creation of underwater reef, all of which align with what we now know about sea level changes in the region. These oral traditions have been transmitted for hundreds of generations without written records, yet they preserve geographical information that archaeologists have only recently confirmed through underwater exploration. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the sheer ubiquity of flood myths. If these stories were purely imaginative, we might expect them to vary randomly across cultures. Instead, they show remarkable consistency in key details. The sudden onset of flooding, the connection to divine displeasure or cosmic cycles, the survival of a small remnant of humanity, and the emergence of a new world order after the waters recede. This consistency becomes even more striking when we consider that many of these cultures had no contact with each other when their flood myths were first recorded. The Maya codices describing the destruction of previous worlds by flood were written in isolation from old world traditions. Pacific Islander stories of lands swallowed by the sea developed independently of Mediterranean accounts. Yet the parallels persist. Modern climate science has provided a framework for understanding how such widespread flooding could have occurred. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, enormous ice sheets locked up so much water that global sea levels stood 120 meters lower than today. But the transition out of the Ice Age was not gradual. It occurred in pulses, with rapid melting events that could raise sea levels by several meters in just a few decades. These meltwater pulses would have been catastrophic for coastal populations. Imagine entire river deltas disappearing overnight, forcing mass migrations inland. Picture island chains vanishing beneath rising seas, their inhabitants forced to flee in whatever boats they could construct. Consider the psychological impact on survivors, who would have seen their entire world literally disappear beneath the waves. Such traumatic events would have been seared into collective memory with an intensity that purely mythological stories could never match. The details would have been preserved not because they served moral or religious purposes, but because they contained practical information essential for survival. Where the waters came from, how high they rose, what signs preceded the flood, how the survivors endured. As we piece together this global picture of catastrophic flooding, the flood myths begin to look less like primitive superstition and more like humanity's earliest historical records, fragmented, mythologized, but ultimately rooted in actual experience. They suggest that our ancestors lived through climate changes so dramatic that they reshaped not just the physical world, but human consciousness itself. The implications are profound. If flood myths preserve genuine historical memories, then the stories of drowned civilizations like Atlantis may not be pure fantasy. They may be echoes of real places, real peoples, real catastrophes that occurred when the world's geography was fundamentally different from what we know today. Deep within the ice cores of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists have discovered the signature of one of the most dramatic climate events in human history. Locked in frozen layers of ancient snow, the evidence tells a story of catastrophic change that occurred roughly 14,600 years ago, an event so sudden and severe that it may have rewritten the map of the world in a matter of decades. Meltwater Pulse 1, as researchers have named it, was not simply another episode of gradual ice melt. It was a deluge of biblical proportions, a moment when vast ice sheets collapsed and dumped their contents into the world's oceans with unprecedented speed. In perhaps as little as 500 years, the blink of an eye in geological terms global, sea levels rose by an estimated 20 meters. That's equivalent to a 6-story building's worth of water suddenly covering every coastline on Earth. The mechanics of this catastrophe are both elegant and terrifying. As temperatures began to rise at the end of the Ice Age, the massive ice sheets that covered North America and Northern Europe didn't simply melt from the surface down. Instead, warming ocean waters began to undercut the ice from below, creating vast caverns and tunnels that weakened the entire structure. When critical thresholds were reached, entire sections of ice sheet, some larger than modern countries, collapsed into the sea in what geologists call ice cliff instabilities. The Laurentide ice sheet, which covered most of what is now Canada and the northern United States, was particularly vulnerable to this process. As it began to collapse, it released not just ice, but enormous volumes of freshwater that had been trapped behind ice dams for millennia. Glacial Lake Agassiz, larger than all the Great Lakes combined, suddenly burst through its frozen barriers and poured into the Atlantic Ocean. The discharge was so massive that it temporarily shut down the ocean's circulation patterns, triggering climate chaos across the northern hemisphere. But the immediate impact on coastal populations would have been even more dramatic than the long-term climate effects. Imagine living in a thriving settlement along what is now the edge of the continental shelf, perhaps 50 kilometers from the nearest ocean. Your community has existed for generations, sustained by rivers that flow to a distant sea, surrounded by the bones and tools of your ancestors. Then, over the course of a few decades, the sea begins to rise. At first, the changes might seem manageable: higher tides, occasional flooding during storms. But the water keeps coming. Rivers that once flowed gently to the sea become torrents backing up into your valleys. Coastal marshes disappear overnight. Islands that served as fishing camps vanish without trace. Within a human lifetime, your entire world has been transformed into an alien seascape. Archaeological evidence suggests that such scenarios played out repeatedly during meltwater pulse 1. Along the coasts of North America, Europe, and Asia, traces of human habitation abruptly disappear from the archaeological record around 14,000 years ago, only to reappear centuries later at sites much further inland. These gaps in the record may represent one of the largest forced migrations in human history. Entire populations fleeing rising seas that consumed their ancestral homes. The impact would have been particularly severe in certain regions. The English Channel, for instance, didn't exist before meltwater pulse 1. Britain was connected to continental Europe by a vast plain called Doggerland, home to forests, rivers, and likely substantial human populations. When the ice collapsed and the seas rose, this entire landscape vanished beneath the waves, forcing its inhabitants to flee to higher ground on either side of what became a narrow sea. Similarly, the land bridge that connected Asia and North America disappeared during this period, submerged beneath the Bering Sea. The timing is particularly intriguing because it coincides roughly with the first clear evidence of human presence in the Americas. Could rising seas have played a role in driving the initial migration of peoples from Asia to the New World? Even more dramatically, vast areas of what is now the continental shelf off Southeast Asia were exposed during the Ice Age, forming a subcontinent called Sundaland that connected modern-day Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. When meltwater pulse 1 struck, an area larger than modern India was swallowed by the South China Sea and the Java Sea. If this region supported significant human populations, as the favorable climate and abundant resources suggest it must have, then their sudden displacement could have triggered migrations and cultural upheavals throughout the region. The scale of these changes is difficult to comprehend from our modern perspective. We think of coastlines as permanent features, reference points that define our maps and our sense of place. But during meltwater pulse 1, the very concept of coast became meaningless. The sea advanced inland at rates that would be visible from day to day, consuming river deltas, flooding vast plains, turning hills into islands and peninsulas into archipelagos. For the human survivors of this catastrophe, the psychological impact may have been as profound as the physical displacement. Imagine trying to explain to your children why the world they were born into no longer exists, why the graves of their grandparents now lie beneath fathoms of salt water, why the stars that once guided your people to familiar hunting grounds now shine over an endless empty sea. Such trauma would have demanded new ways of thinking, new stories to make sense of an incomprehensible loss. The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world may be humanity's attempt to process this collective memory of catastrophic change. Stories that preserve not just the fact of the flooding, but the emotional reality of living through the end of a world. As we consider the possibility that advanced civilizations existed before meltwater pulse 1, we must grapple with a sobering truth. Even the most sophisticated society would have been helpless against such forces. No engineering could hold back a 20-meter rise in sea level. No warning system could prepare for changes that unfolded faster than a single human lifetime. If Atlantis-like civilizations did exist on the continental shelves of the Ice Age world, meltwater pulse 1 would have erased them as completely as if they had never been. The Mediterranean coast of Egypt has always been a place where the boundaries between land and sea seem negotiable, written in shifting sand and subject to revision without notice. It was here, in the summer of 2000, that marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio made a discovery that would fundamentally change our understanding of how completely the sea can swallow human achievement. Working from research vessels anchored in Abu Qir Bay, roughly 30 kilometers northeast of Alexandria, Gaudio's team was following traces detected by sophisticated magnetometers and side-scan sonar. The instruments indicated massive stone structures lying beneath 10 meters of Mediterranean water, but nothing had prepared the archaeologists for what they found when they finally dove to investigate. Emerging from the blue-green depths like a vision from another age, the ruins of Heracleion Thonis spread across the seafloor in almost impossible preservation. Granite statues stood where they had fallen, their carved features still crisp after more than a millennium underwater. Temple columns lay in neat rows, as if arranged by some underwater curator. Most remarkably, golden jewelry and bronze artifacts rested in the sand, exactly where their owners had dropped them during the city's final hours. This was no mythical Atlantis, no philosophical allegory from Plato's imagination. This was a real city with a documented history, mentioned in the writings of Herodotus and depicted on Ptolemaic coins. Heracleion Thonis had been Egypt's most important port before the founding of Alexandria, a mandatory point of entry for all ships arriving from the Greek world. It was a cosmopolitan hub where Egyptian pharaohs met foreign ambassadors, where merchants from across the Mediterranean came to trade in gold, ivory, and exotic spices. The city's dual name reflects its cultural complexity. To the Egyptians, it was Thonis, sacred to the god Thoth. To the Greeks, who increasingly dominated its commerce, it was Heracleion, named for Hercules. This blending of identities would prove prophetic, just as the city belonged to both cultures. It would eventually belong to both land and sea. For nearly 1,000 years, Heracleion Thonis thrived at the mouth of the Nile's westernmost branch. Its harbors welcomed ships bearing diplomatic gifts for the pharaohs and exotic goods for Egypt's growing urban markets. Its temples hosted grand festivals that drew pilgrims from across the ancient world. Its palaces housed visiting dignitaries who came to negotiate treaties or secure trading rights. But the city's location, which had been the source of its prosperity, also sealed its fate. Built on sedimentary soil at the intersection of river and sea, Heracleion Thonis was vulnerable to the geological forces that constantly reshaped the Nile Delta. Earthquakes periodically shook the region, loosening the foundations of buildings and harbor walls. The weight of massive stone temples and palaces compressed the soft deltaic sediments beneath them. Most crucially, the branch of the Nile on which the city depended began to shift its course, leaving the harbor without its vital source of fresh water. The end, when it came, was both sudden and inexorable. A major earthquake in the 8th century CE triggered widespread liquefaction of the water-saturated soil beneath the city. Buildings that had stood for centuries suddenly sank into the earth as if into quicksand. Harbor walls collapsed, allowing the Mediterranean to pour in and claim what the earthquake had begun. Within a matter of hours, one of the ancient world's greatest ports had vanished beneath the waves. For more than 1,200 years, Heracleion Thonis remained hidden beneath the sea, its existence preserved only in fragmentary historical references that many scholars dismissed as exaggerations. The city had become as legendary as Atlantis itself, a place that might once have existed, but whose location and extent could only be guessed at. Gaudio's discovery changed everything. Here was proof that great cities could indeed vanish so completely that their very existence would be questioned by future generations. The underwater excavations revealed not just isolated ruins, but an entire urban landscape. Residential quarters with houses still containing their domestic artifacts, commercial districts with amphora-filled warehouses, religious precincts with massive temple complexes still largely intact. Perhaps most remarkably, the sea had preserved organic materials that would have long since decayed on land. Wooden ship hulls still showed the marks of their builders' tools. Rope and textile fragments revealed sophisticated manufacturing techniques. Even papyrus documents survived in their underwater repositories, protected by the anaerobic conditions of the seafloor. The artifacts told stories of daily life, frozen in time. A golden earring lay where its wearer had dropped it while fleeing the sinking city. Bronze scales still balanced in a merchant's abandoned shop. Votive offerings remained arranged around temple altars, testament to final prayers offered as the waters rose. But Heraclean Thonis was not unique. As underwater archaeology has expanded along Egypt's Mediterranean coast, other drowned cities have emerged from the depths. The ancient port of Canopus, the eastern districts of Alexandria itself, entire harbor complexes mentioned in classical sources, all have been rediscovered beneath the waves, proof that the coastline of antiquity looked nothing like the maps we know today. These discoveries have profound implications for how we understand urban development in the ancient world. If major commercial centers could vanish so completely that their existence became questionable, how many other cities might lie hidden beneath coastal waters around the Mediterranean? How many ports, temples, and palaces remain buried in seafloor sediments, waiting for the right combination of technology and persistence to bring them back to light? The case of Heraclean Thonis also demonstrates how quickly collective memory can fade. Within a few centuries of the city's submersion, its location had been forgotten and its very existence relegated to myth. If not for the meticulous record-keeping of ancient historians and the dedication of modern underwater archaeologists, one of antiquity's most important cities would have remained lost forever. As we stand on the Mediterranean shore today, watching waves roll over waters that conceal entire civilizations, we might wonder what other secrets lie hidden beneath the surface. If Heraclean Thonis could disappear so completely and remain hidden for more than a millennium, what prevents other ancient cities, perhaps even older, perhaps even more sophisticated, from sharing the same fate? The sea, it seems, is an impartial archivist, preserving some treasures while concealing others in depths that have only recently become accessible to human exploration. Each dive into these underwater ruins reveals not just the past, but the provisional nature of all human achievement, the thin line that separates history from legend, memory from myth. Off the southern coast of Japan, where the East China Sea meets the Pacific in a convergence of currents and cultures, lies one of underwater archaeology's most enigmatic puzzles. The Yanaguni Monument, discovered in 1987 by local diver Kihachiro Aratek, presents itself like a challenge thrown down by time itself. Massive stone caryces, carved into geometric precision, rising from the seafloor in what appears to be the ruins of an ancient temple complex. The monument defies easy categorization. Stretching more than 150 meters in length and rising nearly 30 meters from the seafloor, its surfaces are carved into a series of steps, platforms, and passages that suggest architectural planning on a monumental scale. Straight edges intersect at precise right angles. Parallel grooves run across flat surfaces with mechanical regularity. Most intriguingly, certain sections appear to have been deliberately carved to create ceremonial spaces, broad platforms that could have accommodated large gatherings, narrow passages that funnel visitors toward specific viewing points. When marine geologist Masahaki Kimura first descended to study the structure in detail, he found himself confronted with features that seemed to blur the line between natural and artificial. While the monument is carved from the local sandstone bedrock, the precision of its angles and the purposefulness of its layout suggested human intervention on a massive scale. Kimura identified what appeared to be roads, drainage channels, even carved animal figures, leading him to conclude that the monument was at least partially shaped by human hands. The controversy that erupted around Kimura's claims reflects a deeper tension in archaeology between conventional interpretation and anomalous evidence. Mainstream geologists, led by Robert Schoch of Boston University, argued that the monument's features could be explained entirely by natural processes. The local sandstone, they pointed out, fractures along predictable lines when subjected to tectonic stress and erosion. What appeared to be deliberate carving might simply be the result of earthquakes, storms, and currents working on rock with natural weaknesses. Yet even Schock acknowledged that certain aspects of the monument were difficult to explain through purely geological processes. The regularity of the step patterns, the presence of what appeared to be tool marks on certain surfaces, the way different sections seemed to be organized around central focal points, these features pushed the boundaries of what natural forces typically produce. The debate intensified when radiocarbon dating of stalactites found in caverns within the monument suggested that the structure had been above sea level as recently as 12,000 years ago. If the geometric features were indeed artificial, they would represent some of the oldest monumental architecture ever discovered, predating Stonehenge by more than 7,000 years and rivaling the age of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The implications of such a timeline are staggering. 12,000 years ago, according to conventional archaeology, Japan was inhabited by hunter-gatherer societies who lived in small, mobile bands and created tools from stone and bone. The idea that such groups could have organized the massive labor force necessary to carve the Yonaguni monument challenges fundamental assumptions about the development of human civilization. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Yonaguni controversy is how it mirrors debates about other underwater anomalies around the world. Just as the monument's geometric precision seems to exceed what natural processes typically create, its cultural context seems to exceed what conventional archaeology allows for the period when it was carved. Local Okinawan traditions add another layer to the mystery. The islands of the Ryukyu chain, of which Yonaguni is the westernmost, preserve folklore about an ancient kingdom called Mu or Lemuria that vanished beneath the waves in a great catastrophe. While these stories were long dismissed as later inventions influenced by 19th century occult theories, the discovery of the monument has prompted scholars to reconsider whether they might preserve genuine historical memories. The geological history of the region adds credibility to such speculation. During the last ice age, sea levels in the area were indeed much lower, and what are now isolated islands were connected by land bridges. The East China Sea was largely dry land, forming a vast plain that connected Japan to Korea and China. When the ice sheets melted and sea levels rose, this entire landscape was submerged, forcing any inhabitants to migrate to higher ground. If sophisticated societies had developed on these now drowned plains, their most impressive monuments might well have been located in elevated positions, exactly where we find structures like Yonaguni today. The monument's commanding position overlooking what was once a broad coastal plain would have made it visible for kilometers in every direction, a natural location for a temple, palace, or ceremonial center. The question of human involvement becomes even more complex when we consider the monument as relationship to astronomical alignments. Several researchers have noted that certain features of the structure appear to be oriented toward significant solar and stellar positions, particularly the winter solstice sunrise. If these alignments are intentional rather than coincidental, they would suggest that the monument's builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. Such astronomical sophistication would not be without precedent in the Pacific region. The navigation techniques developed by Polynesian seafarers demonstrate that Pacific cultures were capable of remarkably precise astronomical observations thousands of years before European contact. Could the builders of Yonaguni have possessed similar knowledge, using it to create a stone calendar or ceremonial complex aligned with cosmic cycles? The monument's location at the confluence of major ocean currents also suggests that its builders might have been accomplished seafarers. The waters around Yonaguni are part of the Kuroshio current system, which connects Japan to Southeast Asia and the broader Pacific. Ancient mariners following these currents would naturally have stopped at Yonaguni, making it a logical location for a major ceremonial center or trading post. As underwater exploration technology continues to advance, the Yonaguni monument remains a touchstone for broader questions about humanity's past. Whether entirely natural or partially artificial, it demonstrates that the ocean conceals landscapes radically different from anything in our recorded history. It reminds us that sea level changes have repeatedly reshaped the world's geography, submerging entire continents and preserving them in underwater time capsules. Most provocatively, it suggests that our assumptions about the capabilities of ancient peoples may be far too conservative. If the monument is indeed artificial, it represents a level of sophistication that predates anything in the conventional archaeological record. If it is natural, it demonstrates how easily we might mistake the works of time and tide for human achievement, and, by extension, how easily we might overlook genuine human achievements in places where we don't expect to find them. Along the western coast of India, where the Arabian Sea washes against the low hills of Gujarat, ancient Sanskrit texts preserve the memory of a city so magnificent that its very name became synonymous with divine perfection. Dwarka, the golden city of Lord Krishna, was described in the Mahabharata and other Hindu epics as a marvel of urban planning and architectural sophistication, a port city with massive walls, elaborate harbor facilities, and palaces that gleamed with precious metals and jewels. For centuries, scholars treated these descriptions as purely mythological, elaborate poetic inventions designed to glorify divine protagonists, rather than historical documents describing real places. The details seemed too fantastical for serious archaeological consideration. 6-story buildings made of crystal and gold, harbors capable of accommodating thousands of ships, mechanized defenses that could repel armies. But the texts also contained surprisingly specific geographical information. They placed Krishna's capital at the mouth of the Gomti River, on a peninsula jutting into the Arabian Sea. They described the city's relationship to other settlements in the region, its role in trade networks that stretched from Central Asia to Southeast Asia, even the agricultural techniques used in its hinterland. Most intriguingly, they stated that after Krishna's death, the city was swallowed by the sea, its palaces and temples vanishing beneath the waves like an Indian Atlantis. In 1963, archaeologist H.D. Sankalia began excavations at the modern town of Dwarka, located precisely where the ancient texts placed Krishna's capital. What he found exceeded even optimistic expectations. Beneath the current settlement lay evidence of continuous habitation, stretching back more than 3,500 years. Pottery, coins, and architectural fragments suggested a thriving urban center with sophisticated craft traditions and extensive trade connections. But the most dramatic discoveries came not on land, but beneath the nearby sea. Beginning in the 1980s, marine archaeologist S.R. Rao led underwater expeditions that revealed massive stone structures, extending far offshore from the modern coastline. Sonar mapping showed what appeared to be city walls, harbor installations, and building foundations arranged in organized patterns that suggested urban planning on a grand scale. The underwater ruins presented archaeologists with the same interpretive challenges that have surrounded other submerged sites around the world. Some features seemed clearly artificial massive stone blocks arranged in linear patterns that could only have been walls or foundations. Others were more ambiguous, possibly natural rock formations shaped by currents and erosion into geometrical patterns. What was not ambiguous was the sheer scale of the underwater site. The ruins extended for more than 6 kilometers along the coast, covering an area that would have housed a substantial urban population. Core samples from the seafloor revealed layers of cultural debris, pottery fragments, metal artifacts, organic remains, mixed with marine sediments in patterns that suggested rapid submersion rather than gradual abandonment. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from various levels of the site yielded dates ranging from about 3,500 to 1,500 years ago, suggesting that the underwater city had been occupied for centuries before its final submersion. The latest dates corresponded roughly to historical references to Dwarka's destruction, lending credibility to the ancient texts that had long been dismissed as myth. The geological context of the site added another layer of complexity to its interpretation. The Gujarat coast is tectonically active, subject to periodic earthquakes that can dramatically alter the relationship between land and sea. Historical records document several major seismic events in the region, including a massive earthquake in 1819 that permanently altered the local geography and may have caused significant subsidence along the coast. But even accounting for tectonic activity, the extent of submersion at Dwarka requires additional explanation. During the period when the city was presumably thriving, sea levels in the Arabian Sea were actually lower than they are today. For the ruins now lying under several meters of water to have once been dry land, either the coast has subsided significantly or sea levels have risen more than current models predict. Recent geological studies have suggested that both factors may have played a role. The weight of massive stone structures built on the soft sediments of the river delta could have caused gradual subsidence over centuries. More dramatically, tsunamis generated by underwater earthquakes could have both destroyed coastal settlements and permanently altered the local sea level by depositing massive amounts of sediment offshore. The artifacts recovered from underwater Dwarka paint a picture of a cosmopolitan port city with trade connections spanning the Indian Ocean. Pottery styles show influences from Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean. Metal objects demonstrate sophisticated metallurgical techniques, including the production of alloys that required advanced furnace technology. Most intriguingly, several inscribed seals have been found that appear to use scripts related to the Indus Valley writing system, suggesting cultural continuities that span thousands of years. These discoveries have prompted a fundamental reevaluation of the historical value of Sanskrit literature. Texts that were once dismissed as pure mythology are now being studied as potential historical sources that preserve genuine memories of ancient urbanization along the Indian coast. The Mahabharata's descriptions of Dwarka's harbor facilities, for instance, correspond remarkably well with the underwater structures mapped by marine archaeologists. But the implications extend beyond a single city or literary tradition. If Dwarka was indeed a major urban center that was subsequently lost to the sea, it suggests that our understanding of ancient Indian civilization may be incomplete. How many other cities mentioned in Sanskrit literature might have shared Dwarka's fate? How much of early Indian urban development occurred along coastlines that are now underwater? The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider the role of maritime trade in ancient Indian civilization. Archaeological evidence shows that Indian merchants were active throughout the Indian Ocean from at least 2,000 years ago, establishing trading posts from East Africa to Indonesia. Such extensive maritime networks would have required major port cities with sophisticated harbor facilities, exactly the kind of settlements that would be most vulnerable to sea level changes and seismic activity. The story of Dwarka also illustrates how ancient traditions can preserve historical information in forms that modern scholarship initially fails to recognize. The Sanskrit epics that describe the city use highly stylized literary language and embed their urban descriptions within mythological narratives about gods and demons. Without archaeological evidence to provide context, these texts seem to describe impossible fantasies rather than actual places. But as underwater archaeology continues to reveal the extent of human settlement along ancient coastlines, we may need to approach such texts with greater respect for their potential historical value. The boundary between myth and memory may be far more porous than we have assumed, with ancient literature preserving genuine geographical and cultural information in forms that require careful interpretation rather than wholesale dismissal. Standing today on the shores of modern Dwarka, watching fishing boats return from waters that may conceal the remains of Krishna's golden city, one cannot help but wonder what other secrets lie hidden beneath India's coastal waters. The Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal have been highways for human migration and trade for millennia. If cities as substantial as ancient Dwarka could vanish beneath their waves, What other urban centers await discovery in the blue depths offshore? In the depths of the Black Sea, nearly 2 kilometers beneath its surface, lie secrets that may unlock one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. The seafloor of this enclosed basin preserves conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth waters, so oxygen-poor that organic materials remain preserved for millennia, creating what marine geologist Robert Ballard has called the world's largest underwater museum. It was while exploring this underwater preserve that Ballard and his team made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of both geological history and human mythology. Using advanced sonar and submersible technology, they mapped the contours of an ancient coastline preserved beneath 150 meters of water, evidence of a catastrophic flood that may have occurred within human memory and contributed to flood legends around the world. The story begins 20,000 years ago, when much of the world as water was locked in massive ice sheets and sea levels stood far below their current heights. During this period, the Black Sea was not a sea at all, but a vast freshwater lake, fed by rivers from the surrounding mountains, but completely cut off from the world's oceans. Archaeological evidence suggests that its shores supported thriving human communities, fishing villages, farming settlements, possibly even small cities that took advantage of the lake's abundant resources and the fertile soils of its surrounding plains. As the ice began to melt and global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean gradually climbed toward the narrow ridge of land that separated it from the Black Sea basin. For millennia, this natural dam held back the ocean, allowing the Black Sea Lake to remain stable while dramatic changes reshaped coastlines around the world. But geological forces were building toward a catastrophic threshold. Around 7,600 years ago, according to the theory proposed by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, the Mediterranean finally overtopped the land bridge at what is now the Bosphorus Strait. What followed was not a gradual seepage, but a torrential deluge of biblical proportions. Salt water poured through the breach with a volume 200 times greater than Niagara Falls, raising the level of the Black Sea by as much as 15 centimeters per day. The human impact of such a catastrophe is almost impossible to imagine. Communities that had existed for generations along the stable shores of the freshwater lake would have watched their entire world disappear beneath advancing waters. The flood would have been swift enough to force immediate evacuation, but sustained enough to make return impossible. Within a few decades, an area larger than Florida was permanently submerged, forcing mass migrations that may have carried the trauma of flood memories across thousands of kilometers. The preserved coastline discovered by Ballard's expedition provides physical evidence for this scenario. Sonar mapping reveals ancient river channels, beach ridges, and what appear to be submerged settlements along the pre-flood shoreline. Most remarkably, the anaerobic conditions of the deep Black Sea have prevented the usual decay processes, preserving organic materials that would have long since disappeared in other underwater environments. Among the most significant discoveries are submerged sand dunes and beach deposits that show clear evidence of freshwater origins, confirming that the Black Sea was indeed a lake before the catastrophic breach. Fossil remains of freshwater mollusks are found in layers that are abruptly overlain by marine sediments, marking the precise moment when salt water transformed the ecosystem. Even more intriguingly, some of these transition layers contain fragments of worked wood and other possible artifacts that suggest human presence during the flood period. The timing of the Black Sea deluge corresponds remarkably well with several lines of evidence for widespread cultural disruption in the region. Even more compelling are the linguistic connections that some researchers have identified between the Black Sea flood and the spread of Indo-European languages. The timing of the proposed catastrophe coincides roughly with linguistic reconstructions of when Proto-Indo-European began to differentiate into the various language families that eventually spread across Europe, and Asia. Could the trauma of the Black Sea flood have triggered the massive population movements that carried these languages to new territories? The flood theory also provides a compelling explanation for the remarkable consistency of flood myths across cultures that might otherwise seem unconnected. If survivors of the Black Sea catastrophe carried their traumatic memories with them as they migrated to new territories, these stories could have become the foundation for flood traditions found in cultures from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah's Ark. The geographical details preserved in some of these myths show intriguing parallels to what we know about the Black Sea flood. The Mesopotamian accounts, for instance, describe floods that come from specific directions and affect particular types of landscape. Details that make more sense in the context of an actual catastrophic event than as purely symbolic religious stories. Even the biblical chronology, which places the flood in the relatively recent past rather than the deep mythological time, aligns surprisingly well with the proposed date of the Black Sea catastrophe. But the implications of the Black Sea flood extend beyond mythology and linguistics to fundamental questions about lost civilizations. If thriving human communities existed around the freshwater lake before the catastrophe, and if the anaerobic conditions of the deep sea have preserved their remains, then the Black Sea may contain some of the best preserved prehistoric settlements on Earth. Recent underwater explorations have begun to reveal tantalizing glimpses of what may be preserved beneath the waters. Sonar surveys have identified numerous anomalous features along the ancient coastline, linear patterns that could represent walls or foundations, circular structures that might be ancient settlements, even what appear to be harbor installations that could indicate sophisticated maritime technology. The challenges of exploring these potential sites are immense. The depth of the water, the complexity of the currents, and the delicate nature of preserved organic materials all require cutting-edge technology and careful archaeological methodology, but the potential rewards are equally enormous. If substantial prehistoric settlements do exist on the Black Sea floor, they could provide unprecedented insights into European civilization before the advent of agriculture, metalworking, and urban development. As we consider the Black Sea flood in the context of other drowned landscapes around the world, a pattern begins to emerge. Time and again, we find evidence that the most traumatic episodes of sea level change occurred precisely during the periods when human societies were developing the complexity and sophistication that we associate with civilization. The timing may not be coincidental. Coastal environments, with their abundant resources and natural transportation routes, may have been precisely where humanity's most advanced prehistoric cultures developed. The tragedy is that these same coastal locations made such societies most vulnerable to the catastrophic sea level changes that marked the end of the Ice Age. The civilizations that might have provided the foundation for later historical development may have been erased so completely that their existence can only be inferred from fragments of mythology and the occasional glimpse of ruins beneath the waves. In the crystalline waters off North Bimini Island, where the Gulf Stream carries warm Caribbean currents toward the Atlantic depths, lies one of underwater archaeology's most contentious enigmas. Discovered in 1968 by archaeologist J. Manson Valentine, the formation known as the Bimini Road stretches across the seafloor like a paved highway, leading into the blue infinity of the ocean. The structure appears deceptively simple at first glance, a linear arrangement of large, rectangular limestone blocks extending roughly 700 meters in a straight line before curving into a distinctive J shape. The blocks, some weighing several tons, are fitted together with a precision that suggests intentional construction. Parallel lines of similar stones run alongside the main formation, creating what appears to be a multi-lane thoroughfare designed for some ancient purpose that remains obscure. Valentine's discovery occurred during an era when the search for Atlantis had captured popular imagination, fueled partly by the prophecies of psychic Edgar Cayce, who had predicted that ruins of the lost civilization would be found near Bimini in the late 1960s. Timing of the road's discovery seemed to fulfill this prediction with almost supernatural precision. immediately attracting both serious researchers and enthusiastic amateurs to the waters of the Bahamas. The initial excitement was tempered by scientific skepticism as geologists began to study the formation in detail. The limestone blocks, they pointed out, were composed of beach rock, a type of sedimentary rock that forms naturally when beach sand becomes cemented by calcium carbonate in tropical marine environments. The regular fracturing patterns that created the rectangular shapes were consistent with natural geological processes, particularly the stress patterns that develop when beach rock is exposed to wave action and thermal expansion. Dr. Eugene Shin of the U.S. Geological Survey conducted extensive core sampling of the formation and found no evidence of quarrying, shaping, or other human modification of the stones. Radiocarbon dating of material within the beach rock indicated formation periods between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, well within the range of natural processes and far too recent to represent prehistoric engineering on the scale suggested by Atlantis enthusiasts. Yet even as mainstream geology offered natural explanations for the Bimini Road, anomalous features continued to intrigue researchers willing to consider alternative interpretations. Some blocks showed what appeared to be tool marks or deliberate shaping. The precision of the alignment, particularly where the formation curves, seemed to exceed what random fracturing typically produces. Most puzzling were the smaller stones that appeared to be carefully placed between larger blocks, creating a pattern that resembled deliberate construction techniques. The debate intensified as underwater exploration revealed additional structures in the vicinity. Circular stone formations, interpreted by some as foundations for ancient buildings, were discovered nearby. Linear arrangements of stones running parallel to the main road suggested a more complex layout than a single isolated formation. Most intriguingly, what appeared to be a second road was found at a different depth, raising questions about whether multiple construction phases might be represented. Proponents of an artificial origin for the Bimini Road point to several features that seem difficult to explain through purely natural processes. The uniformity of block sizes along certain sections suggests selection and placement rather than random breakage. The way some blocks appear to have been leveled to create flat surfaces resembles engineering techniques used in ancient construction. The alignment of the formation with certain astronomical directions has been cited as evidence of intentional orientation. The geological context of the formation adds complexity to its interpretation. During the last ice age, sea levels in the Bahamas were significantly lower than today, and much of the current seafloor was dry land. The Great Bahama Bank, now submerged beneath shallow tropical waters, was then a vast limestone plain dotted with freshwater lakes and caves. If human populations had inhabited this region during the Ice Age, they might well have constructed roads, buildings, and other infrastructure that would have been submerged as sea levels rose. Archaeological evidence for early human presence in the Caribbean has grown substantially since the Bimini Road's discovery. Sites throughout the region have yielded evidence of sophisticated indigenous cultures that developed complex architectural traditions, extensive trade networks, and advanced maritime technologies. The Lucayan people who inhabited the Bahamas at the time of European contact had demonstrated engineering capabilities that included the construction of ceremonial centers, harbors, and transportation infrastructure. The possibility that earlier Korean cultures might have possessed even greater technological sophistication gained support from discoveries throughout the wider region. The massive stone spheres of Costa Rica, the precise astronomical alignments of sites like Karahanj in Armenia, and the sophisticated harbor installations found at underwater sites like Dwarka in India all suggest that ancient maritime cultures achieved levels of engineering competence that conventional archaeology has been slow to recognize. Recent advances in underwater archaeology have provided new tools for evaluating controversial sites like the Bimini Road. High-resolution sonar mapping can reveal structural details invisible to earlier surveys. Microsampling techniques allow for more precise analysis of stone surfaces and potential tool marks. Comparative studies of known artificial and natural formations provide better baselines for distinguishing between geological and human agency. When these newer techniques are applied to the Bimini Formation, the results remain ambiguous but increasingly intriguing. While much of the structure can indeed be explained by natural beach rock formation and fracturing, certain sections show features that are harder to reconcile with purely geological processes. The precision of some alignments, the apparent selection of stone sizes in specific areas, and the presence of what may be deliberately placed smaller stones all suggest that natural formation might have been supplemented by human modification. This possibility that the Bimini Road represents neither pure nature nor pure artifact, but a combination of both offers a more nuanced interpretation that acknowledges both the geological evidence and the anomalous features that have kept the debate alive for decades. Ancient peoples might have recognized useful natural formations and enhanced them for their own purposes, creating hybrid structures that combine geological processes with human engineering. Such an interpretation would have precedence in other archaeological sites around the world. Many ancient monuments incorporate natural features as integral elements of their design, from the caves of Petra to the rock formations of Easter Island. The builders of Stonehenge transported massive stones across great distances, but they also carefully positioned their monument to take advantage of natural sightlines and astronomical alignments. Whether the Bimini Road ultimately proves to be natural, artificial, or some combination of both, its discovery has contributed to a broader transformation in how we approach underwater archaeology. The formation has demonstrated that the Caribbean seafloor contains features that challenge conventional expectations about prehistoric human capabilities. It has helped to focus attention on the vast areas of once dry land that now lie beneath tropical seas, and it has encouraged more systematic exploration of these submerged landscapes. As we continue to explore the underwater world with increasingly sophisticated technology, formations like the Bimini Road serve as reminders that the boundary between natural and artificial, between geological process and human agency, may be more complex than our analytical frameworks typically allow. The ocean preserves mysteries that resist easy categorization, challenges that require us to expand our understanding of both natural processes and human capabilities in the ancient world. Beneath the endless dunes of the world's largest hot desert, satellite imagery reveals ghost rivers, carved deep into bedrock ancient waterways that once carried life-giving flow across what is now an ocean of sand. The Sahara, that seemingly eternal wasteland, was green not so long ago in geological terms. Between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, during what climatologists call the African humid period, this vast region hosted rivers, lakes, forests, and thriving human communities that left traces of a sophistication we are only beginning to understand. The transformation was driven by subtle shifts in Earth's orbital patterns that intensified the African monsoon, drawing moisture-laden winds deep into the continental interior. Rivers flowed year-round, where now no water falls for decades. Lake Chad expanded to cover an area larger than the Caspian Sea. The Nile received so much additional flow from high Saharan tributaries that it carved new channels and created fertile deltas far into what is now barren desert. Archaeological evidence of human occupation during this period paints a picture of remarkable cultural achievement. At Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, researchers have uncovered stone circles that may represent one of the world's oldest astronomical observatories, constructed around 7,000 years ago. The arrangement of megaliths appears to track the summer solstice and map the positions of bright stars, suggesting sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. Rock art sites throughout the Sahara preserve detailed depictions of the region's green past. Cave paintings show elephants, giraffes, and hippopotamuses roaming landscapes now buried beneath sand dunes. Human figures hunt with sophisticated weapons, tend cattle, and participate in complex ceremonies. Most intriguingly, some sites depict boats and fishing scenes in areas now hundreds of kilometers from the nearest water. Proof that large bodies of water once existed, where now only rock and sand remain. The scale of Saharan rivers during the humid period was truly enormous. Paleocanals mapped by radar and satellite imagery show that some waterways were larger than the modern Amazon. The Tamanrasset River system, which flowed from the Hagar Mountains toward the Mediterranean, would have ranked among the world's major rivers if it existed today. These massive flows carved deep valleys, deposited extensive sediments, and created the kind of riparian environments that naturally attract human settlement. But it was not just the presence of water that made the Green Sahara remarkable. It was the sophistication of the human cultures that developed there. Archaeological sites reveal evidence of cattle domestication that may predate similar developments in the Near East. Pottery traditions show artistic sophistication and technical competence comparable to anything found in contemporary civilizations. Most remarkably, some sites contain evidence of early metallurgy, including copperworking that suggests contact with distant regions or independent technological development. The Tassili Najjar Plateau in Algeria has yielded particularly intriguing evidence of advanced Saharan cultures. Rock art sites there depict not just hunting and pastoral scenes, but complex ceremonial activities, astronomical observations, and what appear to be technological innovations. Some paintings show figures wearing elaborate costumes and headdresses that suggest social stratification and specialized roles. Others depict activities that may represent early forms of scientific observation, people studying the stars, measuring shadows, or conducting rituals tied to seasonal cycles. Perhaps most significantly, several Saharan sites contain evidence of long-distance trade networks that connected sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world thousands of years before the rise of historical empires. Obsidian tools found in Saharan sites have been traced to sources in Ethiopia, more than 2,000 kilometers away. Marine shells from both the Mediterranean and Red Sea coasts appear in inland sites, suggesting regular contact with coastal regions. Even more remarkably, some sites contain artifacts that may indicate contact with civilizations as distant as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The astronomical sophistication evident at sites like Nabta Playa raises profound questions about the intellectual achievements of Saharan cultures. The stone circles there are not random arrangements but carefully planned monuments that track multiple celestial phenomena with remarkable precision. The builders had to possess detailed knowledge of stellar movements, seasonal cycles, and mathematical relationships that rival the achievements of better-known ancient astronomers. This astronomical knowledge becomes even more significant when we consider its potential relationship to flood myths and traditions of lost civilizations. Many ancient cultures that preserved flood stories also maintain sophisticated astronomical traditions, using their knowledge of celestial cycles to predict seasonal flooding, navigate across oceans, and maintain calendars that could track long-term environmental changes. If the Green Sahara supported cultures with advanced astronomical knowledge, they would have been uniquely positioned to understand and perhaps predict the climatic changes that eventually destroyed their homeland. The transition from humid to arid conditions was not instantaneous, but occurred over several centuries, providing time for sophisticated observers to recognize the patterns and perhaps migrate to new territories before their homeland became uninhabitable. The end of the African humid period, around 5,000 years ago, represents one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in human history. As monsoon patterns shifted and rainfall declined, the great rivers of the Sahara slowed to trickles and then disappeared entirely. Lakes that had existed for millennia evaporated, leaving behind salt flats and fossil deposits. The vast grasslands and forests that had supported human communities and abundant wildlife gradually gave way to the desert conditions we know today. For the human populations of the Green Sahara, this transformation would have been catastrophic. Communities that had thrived for thousands of years were forced to abandon their ancestral homes and migrate to regions where water remained available, primarily the Nile Valley, the coastal regions of North Africa, and areas south of the expanding desert. This massive population displacement may have contributed to the cultural and technological developments that marked the beginning of recorded history in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The possibility that Saharan refugees carried advanced knowledge to new territories offers an intriguing perspective on the sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations along the Nile and in other river valleys around 5,000 years ago. The rapid development of monumental architecture, complex social organization, and advanced astronomical knowledge in ancient Egypt might reflect not just local innovation, but the integration of knowledge systems developed over millennia in the now-lost civilizations of the Green Sahara. This perspective gains additional support from linguistic and genetic evidence that suggests significant population movements from the Sahara into the Nile Valley during the period of desertification. Ancient Egyptian texts preserve references to peoples from the West who brought new technologies and cultural practices. Genetic studies of ancient Egyptian populations show contributions from populations that likely originated in the Saharan interior. As we consider the implications of the Green Sahara for our understanding of lost civilizations, we must grapple with the possibility that some of humanity's most significant cultural achievements may have occurred in regions that are now completely uninhabitable. The Sahara, as transformation from garden to wasteland, demonstrates that climate change can erase entire civilizations so completely that their existence can only be inferred from scattered artifacts and the faint traces visible in satellite imagery. The desert now covers an area larger than the entire United States, burying beneath its sands whatever monuments, cities, and cultural achievements the Green Sahara may have produced. Unlike underwater ruins, which can be explored by divers and submersibles, the archaeological treasures of the Sahara remain largely inaccessible beneath shifting dunes that can be hundreds of feet deep. Yet occasionally, the wind uncovers fragments of this lost world pottery shards that speak of artistic traditions, stone tools that demonstrate technical competence, rock art that preserves the memory of green landscapes and abundant life. Each discovery reminds us that the Sahara is not just a natural barrier, but a vast cemetery of human achievement, a place where entire civilizations may have risen and fallen without leaving traces in our historical records. In the heart of Egypt's western desert, where sand dunes stretch endlessly toward horizons that shimmer with heat mirages, paleontologists work carefully with brushes and dental picks to uncover one of Earth's most extraordinary archaeological sites. Wadi al-Haytham, the Valley of the Whales, contains the fossilized remains of ancient cetaceans, massive marine mammals that swam in warm, shallow seas 40 million years ago, where now only scorpions and desert foxes venture. The fossils are remarkable not just for their preservation, but for what they reveal about the transitional nature of life on Earth. These ancient whales still possessed 4 legs and could move on land, representing a crucial evolutionary bridge between terrestrial mammals and the fully aquatic giants that inhabit our oceans today. Basilosaurus isis, the largest species found here, stretched up to 20 meters in length, its serpentine body propelled by powerful tail flukes, while tiny hind limbs, evolutionary remnants of its terrestrial ancestry, projected from its sides like biological afterthoughts. The presence of whales in what is now one of Earth's most arid regions serves as a profound reminder that the concepts of land and sea, desert and ocean are far more fluid than our human experience suggests. The Tethys Sea, which once covered much of what is now the Sahara, supported a diverse marine ecosystem that included not only primitive whales, but sharks, sea cows, crocodiles, and countless species of fish and invertebrates. This ancient seaway was not merely a body of water, but a dynamic geological feature that connected the Atlantic and Indo-Pacific Oceans, creating a circumglobal tropical current that regulated Earth's climate and supported marine life across vast distances. The warm, nutrient-rich waters of the Tethys Sea provided ideal conditions for the evolution of early whales, offering abundant food sources and shallow coastal environments where these transitional mammals could perfect the adaptations that would eventually make them masters of the deep ocean. The fossilization process that preserved these ancient whales required precise conditions that highlight the delicate balance between preservation and destruction that governs all archaeological evidence. The whales died in shallow, calm waters where their bodies could be quickly buried by fine sediments before decomposition or scavengers could destroy the bones. Over millions of years, these sediments hardened into limestone, creating a permanent record of life in the ancient Tethys Sea. What makes Wadi al-Haytham particularly remarkable is not just the number of whale fossils. Over 400 have been discovered, but the completeness of many specimens and the insight they provide into whale behavior and ecology. Some fossils preserve evidence of social groupings, suggesting that these early whales may have traveled in pods like their modern descendants. Others show evidence of predation, with shark teeth embedded in whale bones or bite marks that tell stories of ancient marine warfare. The valley also preserves evidence of the broader ecosystem that supported these marine giants. Fossilized mangrove roots indicate that the coastline was fringed with tropical vegetation. Remains of seagrasses suggest shallow, warm lagoons perfect for whale nurseries. Most intriguingly, some sites contain fossilized footprints of early terrestrial mammals alongside whale bones, providing rare direct evidence of the interface between land and sea during this ancient period. As climate patterns shifted and tectonic forces gradually closed the Tethys Sea, this marine paradise transformed into the arid landscape we see today. The process was not sudden, but occurred over millions of years, with the sea gradually shrinking and becoming more saline until it finally disappeared entirely, leaving behind salt deposits, fossil reefs, and a remarkable whale graveyard that now draws scientists from around the world. The transformation of the Tethys Sea region from marine paradise to desert wasteland provides a powerful analogy for understanding how dramatically Earth's geography can change over time. If marine ecosystems covering millions of square kilometers can vanish so completely that their existence can only be inferred from fossils, how much more easily might human civilizations disappear from the historical record? The whale fossils of Wadi al-Haytham also demonstrate the role that changing sea levels and climate patterns have played throughout Earth's history in creating and destroying habitats. The shallow seas that supported early whale evolution were themselves the product of specific geological and climatic conditions that no longer exist. When those conditions changed, entire ecosystems vanished, forcing the survivors to adapt to radically different environments or face extinction. This pattern of environmental transformation and species migration resonates strongly with theories about lost human civilizations. Just as early whales had to adapt from terrestrial to fully marine lifestyles, as their environment changed, human populations may have been forced to undergo equally dramatic cultural and technological adaptations as sea levels rose and familiar landscapes disappeared beneath the waves. The precision required for fossil preservation at Wadi al-Haytham also illuminates the challenges facing underwater archaeologists searching for evidence of drowned civilizations. The whales were preserved because they died in specific depositional environments and were quickly buried by sediments that protected them from destruction. Human settlements along ancient coastlines would have faced much harsher conditions for preservation. Organic materials would have decayed. Stone structures would have been scattered by waves and currents, and cultural artifacts would have been buried beneath layers of marine sediment. Yet the whale fossils also demonstrate that even the most unlikely preservation scenarios can occur under the right conditions. In locations where rapid burial protected cultural materials from destruction, where anaerobic conditions prevented decay, or where specific chemical environments favored fossilization, evidence of ancient human activity might be preserved with the same remarkable detail found in the Valley of the Whales. The interdisciplinary nature of research at Wadi al-Haydan, combining paleontology, geology, climatology, and ecology, provides a model for how investigations of potentially drowned civilizations might proceed. Understanding the geological processes that create and destroy archaeological sites, the environmental conditions that favor preservation, and the broader patterns of climate change and sea level fluctuation becomes essential for interpreting whatever evidence might be discovered. Most fundamentally, the whale fossils serve as a memento mori for civilizations, a reminder that even the most successful adaptations to environmental conditions are temporary in the face of geological time. The early whales of the Tethys Sea were masters of their domain, perfectly adapted to their marine environment. Yet their world disappeared so completely that we can only reconstruct it from scattered bones in the desert sand. As we search for evidence of lost human civilizations beneath modern seas, the whales in the desert whisper a sobering truth. The Earth has always been a planet of constant change, where sea becomes land and land becomes sea in endless cycles that operate on timescales that dwarf human experience. The drowned cities we seek may be only the most recent chapter in a story of creation and destruction that has been unfolding for billions of years, leaving traces for those patient enough to read the subtle signatures preserved in stone and sediment. The Mediterranean Sea holds more than wine dark waters and the romance of ancient trade routes. Beneath its deceptively familiar surface lies a graveyard of civilizations, a collection of drowned cities that span millennia and speak to the fundamental instability of human achievement in the face of geological forces. From the collapsed caldera of Santorini to the earthquake-shattered harbors of Sicily, the Mediterranean preserves evidence of how quickly thriving urban centers can vanish beneath the waves. The story of Akrotiri on the Greek island of Santorini provides perhaps the most dramatic example of how natural catastrophe can create a real-world Atlantis. Around 1600 BCE, this Bronze Age city was one of the most sophisticated settlements in the Aegean world, with multi-story buildings, advanced plumbing systems, and artistic achievements that rivaled anything found in contemporary Crete or mainland Greece. The city's frescoes depict a cosmopolitan culture engaged in long-distance trade, with ships connecting Santorini to Cyprus, Egypt, and the Levant. The end came with volcanic violence that exceeded anything in recorded human history. The eruption that destroyed Akrotiri ejected more than 60 cubic kilometers of magma, ash, and rock into the atmosphere, enough material to bury all of Manhattan under more than 200 feet of debris. The explosion was heard across the eastern Mediterranean and created tsunamis that devastated coastlines from Crete to the Levant. Most catastrophically, the eruption caused the central part of Santorini to collapse into the sea, creating the distinctive caldera that now defines the island's geography. Akrotiri itself was preserved beneath layers of volcanic ash like a Bronze Age Pompeii, but the broader civilization of which it was part seems to have vanished almost entirely from the historical record. The sophisticated maritime culture that connected the Aegean islands, the extensive trade networks that brought African ivory and Afghan lapis lazuli to Santorini's workshops, the religious and artistic traditions that produced some of the ancient world's most beautiful frescoes. All were swept away in the space of a few hours. Some scholars have suggested that the destruction of Santorini and its broader cultural sphere provided the historical kernel for Plato's Atlantis story. The chronology fits reasonably well if we allow for the exaggerations typical of oral tradition transmitted across centuries. The description of a sophisticated island civilization destroyed by earthquakes and floods in a single day matches the fate of Santorini with remarkable precision. Even details like the concentric rings of land and water that characterized Plato's Atlantis might derive from memories of Santorini's distinctive caldera. But Santorini represents only one episode in a broader pattern of Mediterranean cities lost to geological catastrophe. Along the southern coast of Italy, the ancient city of Sybaris was legendary for its wealth and luxury, so much so that the term Sybaritic still connotes excessive indulgence. Founded by Greek colonists in the 8th century BCE, Sybaris grew to become one of the largest cities in the ancient world, with a population that may have exceeded 300,000 at its peak. The city's prosperity was built on control of trade routes between the Greek world and the resource-rich regions of southern Italy. Sybarite merchants established colonies throughout the western Mediterranean, creating a commercial network that rivaled Athens or Corinth. The city was famous for its urban planning, with straight, wide streets and advanced water management systems that supported its large population. But Sybaris's location in the marshy delta of the Crathis River, which had made it a natural hub for trade and transportation, also sealed its fate. When the city was destroyed by rival Croton in 510 BCE, the victors deliberately diverted the river to flow over the ruins, ensuring that Sybaris would never rise again. Within a few generations, the location of one of antiquity's greatest cities was lost, buried beneath layers of river sediment that have kept it hidden from archaeologists for more than 2,500 years. Recent archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry have identified possible traces of Sybaris beneath the modern Calabrian landscape. But the city remains largely inaccessible beneath meters of alluvial deposits. Like the drowned cities we see beneath the Mediterranean's waves, Sybaris demonstrates how completely urban centers can vanish when natural forces, whether volcanic eruption, earthquake, or river flooding, overwhelm human engineering. The pattern repeats throughout the Mediterranean basin. The ancient city of Hellas in the Peloponnese was destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami in 373 BCE, sinking beneath the waters of the Gulf of Corinth so completely that Roman tourists could still see its ruins beneath the surface centuries later. The city of Epidaurus Limera in Laconia was gradually submerged as tectonic activity caused the coastline to subside, leaving its harbor installations and residential quarters beneath shallow coastal waters. Even more dramatically, entire regions of the Mediterranean have been reshaped by geological processes that operate on timescales, visible to human observation. The Campi Flegrei region near Naples has experienced repeated episodes of uplift and subsidence that have alternately exposed and submerged coastal areas over the past 2 millennia. The ancient Roman port of Puteoli, now called Pozzuoli, has risen and fallen so many times that its market building, the Macellum, contains columns that show multiple bands of marine, warring organisms recording the various levels at which the structure has been submerged over the centuries. These examples of Mediterranean cities lost to geological processes take on additional significance when we consider the region's role as the cradle of Western civilization. The Mediterranean was humanity's first highway, the body of water that connected the great civilizations of antiquity, and enabled the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies that drove cultural development. If cities could vanish so completely from this well-documented and intensively explored region, how much more might be hidden beneath the waves in less familiar parts of the world's oceans? The archaeological challenges posed by submerged Mediterranean sites also illuminate the broader difficulties of underwater exploration. Even in relatively shallow coastal waters, marine growth, sediment deposition, and the destructive effects of wave action can quickly obscure ancient structures. The clear waters and good diving conditions that make the Mediterranean attractive to underwater archaeologists are offset by the millennia of human activity that have disturbed many coastal sites and the intensive modern development that has altered natural sedimentation patterns. Yet recent technological advances have begun to reveal the true extent of the Mediterranean's underwater archaeological heritage. High-resolution sonar mapping has identified hundreds of potential sites along coastlines from Spain to Turkey. Submersible vehicles equipped with sophisticated imaging systems can now explore sites too, deep or dangerous for human divers. Most importantly, improved understanding of sea level changes, tectonic processes, and sedimentation patterns allows archaeologists to predict where ancient settlements are most likely to be preserved. These technological capabilities are revealing that the Mediterranean's reputation as a well-explored archaeological region may be misleading. The sea itself, covering nearly 2.5 million square kilometers, remains largely unexplored below recreational diving depths. Vast areas of the continental shelf that were exposed during periods of lower sea level have never been systematically surveyed. Even well-known coastal areas may contain submerged ruins that have been overlooked because they lie beneath layers of sediment, or in locations where their artificial nature is not immediately obvious. As exploration of the Mediterranean's underwater heritage intensifies, we may discover that the ghost cities already known represent only a small fraction of the urban centers that have been lost to the sea. The Mediterranean's long history of human settlement, its vulnerability to seismic activity, and its complex patterns of sea level change suggest that many more drowned cities may await discovery in its depths. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of how precarious human civilization has always been, how quickly the works of thousands can be reduced to rubble and silt. The Mediterranean's ghost cities whisper warnings across the centuries that no achievement is permanent, that the earth itself is always in motion, and that the sea gives up its secrets reluctantly, preserving some treasures while claiming others for eternity. Beneath the cold, gray waters of the North Sea lies one of Europe's most significant lost landscapes, a sunken continent that once connected Britain to the European mainland and supported thriving human communities for thousands of years. Doggerland, named after the Dogger Bank, where North Sea fishermen have long hauled up mammoth bones and stone tools in their nets, represents the most extensive area of drowned land in the Northern Hemisphere, a region larger than modern Britain that vanished beneath the waves as the last ice age ended. During the height of the last glaciation, around 20,000 years ago, so much water was locked in ice sheets that global sea level stood more than 120 meters lower than today. What is now the North Sea was then a vast plain of tundra and forest, crossed by rivers that would eventually become submarine canyons and dotted with lakes that would become undersea valleys. This landscape, stretching from the British Isles to Scandinavia and from the Netherlands to Denmark, provided a highway for both animals and humans migrating across northern Europe. The environment of Ice Age Doggerland was remarkably rich and diverse. As the climate warmed and ice sheets retreated, the region transformed from Arctic tundra into temperate woodland. Archaeological evidence suggests that it supported large populations of mammals, including mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, giant deer, and the ancestors of modern European species. For human hunters and gatherers, Doggerland would have been a paradise of abundant resources and easy travel routes. Stone Age peoples moved across this landscape in seasonal migrations that followed game herds and resource cycles across distances that would now require sea voyages. Archaeological sites on both sides of the North Sea show remarkable similarities in tool technologies, artistic styles, and subsistence strategies, suggesting regular contact and cultural exchange across what is now a marine barrier. The loss of Doggerland didn't just submerge land, it severed cultural connections that had existed for millennia. The drowning of Doggerland was not a single catastrophic event, but a complex process that unfolded over several thousand years as global climate patterns shifted and ice sheets melted. Initially, rising sea levels created a landscape of lakes, rivers, and coastal marshes that may have been even more attractive to human settlement than the previous tundra environment. Estuarine ecosystems rich in fish, waterfowl, and marine mammals would have provided year-round resources for sophisticated hunter-gatherer societies. Archaeological evidence for these communities comes primarily from artifacts dredged up by North Sea, fishing vessels, and occasional finds on beaches where storms have exposed submerged land surfaces. Stone tools, bone implements, and even wooden artifacts have been recovered, suggesting that organic preservation in the cold, anaerobic sediments of the North Sea may be exceptional. Most remarkably, several human remains have been found, including partial skulls and limb bones that provide direct evidence of the people who once lived on this drowned continent. The most famous of these finds is the Cheddar Man, a complete Mesolithic skeleton discovered not in Doggerland itself, but in a cave in southwestern England that was occupied during the period when Doggerland was being submerged. Recent advances in marine archaeology have begun to reveal the true extent of archaeological preservation in the submerged landscapes of the North Sea. Seismic surveys conducted for oil and gas exploration have identified buried river channels, lake beds, and coastal deposits that may contain extensive archaeological sites. High-resolution sonar mapping has revealed features that could represent human-made structures, though the depth of water and thickness of overlying sediments make investigation extremely challenging. The environmental conditions that led to Doggerland's submersion were driven by the same meltwater pulses that affected coastlines around the world. But the North Sea experienced additional complications that made the flooding particularly catastrophic. The collapse of ice sheets in Scandinavia not only contributed meltwater to global sea level rise, but also triggered massive, tsunami-like floods as ice-dammed lakes burst their barriers and poured into the Baltic Sea basin. The most dramatic of these events occurred around 8,200 years ago, when the final drainage of Lake Agassiz in North America released enormous volumes of fresh water into the North Atlantic. This meltwater pulse not only raised sea levels globally, but also disrupted ocean circulation patterns, triggering a brief return to near-glacial conditions across northern Europe. For the remaining inhabitants of Doggerland, this climate disaster would have been the final blow, forcing the survivors to migrate to higher ground in Britain or continental Europe. The story of Doggerland's submersion provides crucial context for understanding other drowned landscapes around the world. The North Sea is one of the most intensively studied marine regions on Earth, yet we are only beginning to comprehend the archaeological heritage hidden beneath its waters. If such extensive archaeological landscapes can remain largely unexplored in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, what might be preserved in more remote ocean basins? The technological challenges of exploring submerged archaeological sites in the North Sea also illuminate the difficulties facing underwater archaeology worldwide. The cold, murky waters limit visibility and make diving operations dangerous. Strong currents and frequent storms create additional hazards for research vessels. Most significantly, the thick layers of marine sediment that have accumulated over millennia make access to archaeological horizons extremely difficult without large-scale excavation that would be prohibitively expensive and environmentally destructive. Yet these same conditions that make exploration difficult may have created ideal preservation environments for organic archaeological materials. The cold, oxygen-poor conditions of North Sea sediments are similar to those that have preserved wooden ships, leather artifacts, and even human bodies in other northern European contexts. If systematic exploration of Doggerland becomes feasible, it might reveal not just stone tools and animal bones, but complete archaeological assemblages that include textiles, woodworking debris, and other organic materials that rarely survive in terrestrial contexts. The loss of Doggerland also had profound implications for the development of insular British culture. The severing of land connections between Britain and the continent around 7,500 years ago forced the inhabitants to develop maritime technologies and cultural adaptations that shaped British society for millennia. The transition from continental to island existence may have accelerated technological innovation, encouraged cultural conservatism, or both, as isolated populations had to become more self-sufficient while maintaining what connections they could across increasingly treacherous waters. From a broader perspective, Doggerland serves as a powerful reminder that the familiar geography of modern Europe is historically very recent. For most of human history in the region, the North Sea didn't exist, and the cultural and environmental patterns that shaped early European society developed across landscapes that are now completely inaccessible beneath hundreds of feet of water and sediment. The implications extend beyond Europe to continental shelves around the world that were similarly exposed during periods of lower sea level. If Doggerland supported substantial human populations, despite its northern latitude and challenging climate, how much more might be preserved beneath the waters off more hospitable coastlines? The continental shelves of Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Americas all experienced similar submersion, and all may preserve archaeological evidence of human societies that developed in landscapes radically different from anything visible today. As we consider the possibility that advanced prehistoric civilizations might have existed on now drowned continental shelves, Doggerland provides both encouragement and caution. The preservation potential is clearly enormous, as demonstrated by the artifacts that continue to emerge from North Sea waters. But the challenges of systematic exploration are equally daunting, requiring technological capabilities and financial resources that push the boundaries of current archaeological practice. In the warm waters between mainland Southeast Asia and Australia lies one of the world's most intriguing archaeological frontiers, a vast continental shelf that was exposed as dry land during the Ice Age and may have supported some of humanity's most sophisticated prehistoric maritime cultures. Sunderland, as biogeographers call this drowned continent, encompasses an area larger than modern India and includes what are now the shallow seas between Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. During the last glacial maximum, when sea levels stood more than 120 meters below their current heights, Sunderland formed a continuous landmass that connected most of what we now call the Indonesian archipelago. The South China Sea, the Java Sea, and the Strait of Malacca were then vast plains crossed by major river systems and dotted with lakes and coastal wetlands. Only narrow straits separated this continental mass from New Guinea and Australia, creating what biogeographers call the Wallace Line, a biogeographical boundary that marked the edge of the Asian continental shelf. The implications of this drowned geography for human prehistory are staggering. Modern Southeast Asia is one of the world's most densely populated regions, home to sophisticated cultures that have engaged in maritime trade and cultural exchange for millennia. If similar populations existed on the exposed continental shelf during the Ice Age, their submersion at the end of the glacial period would represent one of the largest losses of human cultural heritage in history. Archaeological evidence from the modern coastlines of Southeast Asia suggests that the region has indeed supported complex human societies for tens of thousands of years. Cave sites in Borneo, Java, and the Philippines have yielded evidence of sophisticated tool technologies, artistic achievements, and maritime capabilities that date back at least 40,000 years. The famous hobbit fossils from Flores demonstrate that early human species were capable of water crossings that required sophisticated boat-building technologies, while cave paintings in Sulawesi rival the artistic achievements of European Paleolithic sites. The oral traditions of Southeast Asian cultures preserve remarkably consistent memories of drowned lands and catastrophic floods. Javanese legends speak of the kingdom of Majapahit being preceded by earlier maritime empires that were swallowed by the sea. Malaysian folklore describes vast lands that once connected the peninsula to Sumatra and Java, populated by advanced civilizations that possessed technologies and knowledge systems that were lost when the waters rose. Even more intriguingly, these stories often include specific geographical details that correspond to features of the now submerged continental shelf. The Orang Asli peoples of the Malay Peninsula preserve particularly detailed traditions about the geography of Sunderland before its submersion. Their oral histories describe river systems, mountain ranges, and coastal features that align remarkably well with what modern marine geology has revealed about the submerged landscape. Some traditions even specify the locations of ancient settlements and ceremonial sites, providing potential targets for underwater archaeological exploration. Recent advances in marine geology have begun to reveal the true complexity of the drowned Sunderland landscape. High-resolution bathymetric mapping shows that the region's river systems were indeed massive during the Ice Age, with the Proto-Maishong River flowing across what is now the South China Sea to join other major waterways in creating one of the world's largest river deltas. This delta region, now lying beneath 40 to 60 meters of water, would have provided ideal conditions for early agricultural development and urban settlement. Seismic surveys conducted for oil and gas exploration have identified buried river channels, coastal terraces, and sedimentary structures that may preserve archaeological materials from the Ice Age period. Core samples from these formations have yielded pollen, charcoal, and other organic materials that document the environmental conditions of Sunderland before its submersion, but systematic archaeological exploration has barely begun. The few underwater archaeological investigations that have been conducted in Southeast Asian waters have yielded tantalizing hints of what may be preserved beneath the waves. Off the coast of Malaysia, divers have discovered what appear to be stone structures and tool scatters in waters shallow enough for systematic investigation. Near Indonesia, sonar surveys have identified linear features and geometric patterns on the seafloor that some researchers interpret as possible artificial structures. Most remarkably, several sites have yielded evidence of sophisticated maritime technologies that predate anything found in the terrestrial archaeological record. Wooden artifacts recovered from underwater contexts off the coasts of Thailand and Vietnam include boat fragments, fishing equipment, and structural elements that demonstrate advanced woodworking capabilities. While dating these materials remains challenging, their preservation in marine environments suggests that they may be far older than anything preserved on land. The cultural implications of Sunderland's submersion extend far beyond Southeast Asia itself. The region served as a crucial corridor for human migration between Asia and Australia, and its advanced maritime cultures may have played key roles in the spread of technologies, artistic traditions, and even agricultural systems throughout the Indo-Pacific region. If these cultures possessed the sophisticated boat building and navigation capabilities suggested by archaeological evidence, they might have established trade networks and colonial settlements across vast areas of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This possibility gains support from linguistic and genetic evidence that suggests complex patterns of human migration and cultural exchange throughout the region during the late Ice Age and early Holocene periods. The distribution of language families, agricultural crops, and cultural practices across the Indo-Pacific shows patterns that are difficult to explain without assuming regular long-distance contact between island populations, contact that would have required exactly the kind of advanced maritime technologies that the archaeological evidence suggests existed in prehistoric Southeast Asia. The timing of Sunderland as submersion also corresponds to a period of rapid cultural and technological change throughout the region. The transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural societies, the development of pottery traditions, and the emergence of complex social organization all occurred during the period when rising sea levels were transforming the geography of Southeast Asia. Rather than representing independent local developments, these changes might reflect the displacement and reorganization of populations forced to adapt to dramatically altered environmental conditions. The challenges of exploring Sunderland's archaeological heritage are formidable, but not insurmountable. The warm, relatively shallow waters of the South China Sea and Java Sea provide better diving conditions than many other potential sites of drowned civilizations. The region's active oil and gas industry has generated extensive geological data that can guide archaeological surveys. Most importantly, the strong maritime traditions of modern Southeast Asian societies provide both technical expertise and cultural motivation for underwater archaeological research. Recent collaborative projects between international researchers and local institutions have begun to develop the technological and methodological frameworks necessary for systematic exploration of the region's submerged landscapes. High-resolution sonar mapping, underwater excavation techniques adapted to tropical marine environments, and innovative approaches to dating and analyzing materials recovered from underwater contexts are all being refined through pilot projects in various parts of Southeast Asia. The potential discoveries could revolutionize our understanding of human cultural development in one of the world's most important regions. If Sunderland supported advanced maritime civilizations before its submersion, their technological achievements, artistic traditions, and social innovations might have influenced cultural development across a vast area of the Indo-Pacific world. The loss of these civilizations to rising sea levels might represent one of the greatest cultural catastrophes in human history, equivalent to the hypothetical destruction of Atlantis, but supported by solid geological and archaeological evidence. As we stand on the shores of modern Southeast Asia, looking out over waters that conceal an entire continent of human achievement, we are reminded that our understanding of human prehistory may be fundamentally incomplete. The familiar narrative of human cultural development, based largely on terrestrial archaeological sites, may miss entirely the most sophisticated and influential societies of the prehistoric world, societies that now lie silent beneath the waves, waiting for the technology and determination necessary to bring their stories back to light. In a cave in the Swabian Jura of southern Germany, archaeologist Nicholas Conrad made a discovery that would echo across time with haunting beauty. From sediments laid down 43,000 years ago, he carefully extracted fragments of what would prove to be the world's oldest known musical instrument, a flute carved from the hollow wing bone of a griffin vulture at its surface, pierced with precisely placed finger holes that still, after millennia of silence, could produce clear melodious notes. The ho-ho flute, as it came to be known, challenges our understanding of early human cultural achievement in ways that resonate deeply with questions about lost civilizations and drowned worlds. Here was evidence that our Ice Age ancestors possessed not merely the technical skills to craft complex tools or the artistic vision to create cave paintings, but the abstract conceptual abilities to create music, perhaps the most ephemeral and yet most emotionally powerful of all human arts. The craftsmanship required to create this ancient instrument was remarkably sophisticated. The maker had to select a bone of precisely the right dimensions, hollow out its interior without cracking the delicate structure, and calculate the exact placement of finger holes to produce specific musical intervals. The precision of the work suggests not just individual skill, but cultural knowledge passed down through generations of instrument makers, a tradition of music making that may have extended back even further into the mists of human prehistory. What makes this discovery particularly poignant in the context of lost civilizations is how fragile musical traditions can be, yet how stubbornly they persist. Unlike stone tools or cave paintings, music leaves no permanent physical trace. It exists only in the moment of performance and in the memories of those who hear it. Yet the Hohlfels flute survived because someone had the foresight to place it carefully in a cave where the conditions were perfect for preservation, protected from the elements that would have destroyed it on the surface. This delicate balance between preservation and loss that governed the survival of the ancient flute operates on a much larger scale in the story of human civilizations. Just as the flute required precise conditions to survive, the right humidity, temperature, and chemical environment, entire cities and cultures require specific circumstances to leave traces for future archaeologists to discover. The flute also demonstrates how technological sophistication can exist in forms that challenge our preconceptions about ancient capabilities. The Paleolithic peoples who created this instrument lived in small, mobile bands that left little evidence of permanent architecture or complex social organization. By conventional archaeological standards, they would be classified as simple hunter-gatherers. Yet their musical achievements required mathematical understanding, technical precision, and cultural sophistication that rivals anything produced by supposedly more advanced civilizations. This disconnect between apparent social complexity and actual cultural achievement becomes even more significant when we consider the possibility of lost civilizations. If Ice Age peoples could create musical instruments of such sophistication while living in what we would consider primitive conditions, what might they have achieved in more favorable environments along the resource-rich coastlines that are now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water? The preservation of the whole fell's flute in cave sediments also provides insights into the types of environments where evidence of ancient cultures is most likely to survive. Caves, with their stable temperatures and protection from erosion, have preserved organic materials that would have decomposed within decades or centuries in surface contexts. Similarly, the anaerobic conditions beneath marine sediments might preserve cultural materials from drowned civilizations with equal fidelity. Musical instruments occupy a unique position in human culture as objects that bridge the material and spiritual worlds. They are technological achievements that serve aesthetic and ceremonial purposes rather than purely practical ones. The presence of sophisticated musical instruments in Ice Age context suggests that even the earliest human societies devoted significant resources to activities that we might categorize as luxury or non-essential, a pattern that becomes even more pronounced in later civilizations. The social implications of Ice Age music making are profound. Creating and performing music requires coordination between individuals, shared cultural knowledge about rhythm and melody, and probably specialized roles for different community members. The flute suggests that Paleolithic societies possessed the social complexity necessary to support specialized craftspeople, musical performers, and probably ceremonial activities that brought communities together around shared aesthetic experiences. These same social capabilities would have been prerequisites for the development of more complex civilizations. If Ice Age peoples could organize musical performances, they certainly possessed the social technologies necessary to coordinate large-scale construction projects, maintain trade networks, and develop the kinds of urban settlements that we associate with civilized societies. The universality of music across human cultures also provides a potential tool for recognizing evidence of lost civilizations. Every known human society creates music, often using similar principles of rhythm, melody, and harmony, despite developing in isolation from one another. If we discover artifacts from drowned civilizations, musical instruments might be among the most reliable indicators of human cultural activity, recognizable even when other aspects of material culture remain mysterious. The acoustic properties of the whole fell's flute have been carefully studied by musicologists, who have discovered that it could produce a range of notes corresponding to modern musical scales. This suggests that the mathematical relationships underlying music, the ratios between frequencies that create consonant harmonies, were understood by Ice Age peoples at an intuitive, if not explicit level. Such understanding represents a form of applied mathematics that could have been applied to other technological challenges, from architecture to navigation. The emotional power of music also offers insights into how ancient peoples might have processed traumatic experiences, like the catastrophic climate changes that marked the end of the Ice Age. Music serves universal human functions in ritual, mourning, celebration, and community bonding. For peoples experiencing the loss of familiar landscapes to rising seas, music might have provided a way to preserve cultural memory, maintain community cohesion, and process collective trauma. When we imagine the final days of drowned civilizations like Atlantis or the submerged cities of Sunderland, we might picture not just the practical challenges of evacuation and resettlement, but also the cultural losses, the songs that would never again be sung, the ceremonies that could no longer be performed, the musical traditions that died with the communities that created them. Yet the survival of the whole flute offers hope that even the most ephemeral aspects of human culture can sometimes transcend the destruction of the civilizations that created them. Just as this ancient instrument preserved its maker's musical vision across 43 millennia, perhaps other traces of lost civilizations await discovery in the unlikely places where the right conditions have protected them from time as erosion. In the end, The ancient flute serves as both artifact and metaphor, reminder that human creativity and cultural achievement can survive in the most unexpected ways, and that the search for lost civilizations requires use to listen carefully for the faint echoes of voices that still whisper across the vast silences of time. Along the rugged coastlines of Australia, where red cliffs meet turquoise waters and the dream time seems to shimmer just beneath the surface of ordinary reality, Aboriginal elders still tell stories that serve as both spiritual teachings and surprisingly accurate geographical records. These narratives, passed down through countless generations of oral tradition, describe landscapes that have been underwater for more than 10,000 years with a precision that has astonished marine archaeologists and geologists. The Wardaman people of the Northern Territory preserve detailed accounts of when the Wessel Islands were connected to the mainland by dry land, allowing easy passage between what are now separate landmasses. The Yolngu people of Arnhem Land describe the formation of blue mud bay in terms that correspond exactly to what marine geology reveals about sea level changes at the end of the Ice Age. Most remarkably, some traditions specify the depths of channels between islands, the locations of freshwater springs that are now beneath the sea, and the positions of reefs that formed as rising waters flooded previously dry valleys. These stories challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between myth and historical memory. Conventional archaeological thinking has long treated oral traditions as cultural constructs that might preserve general themes or moral lessons, but could not be relied upon for specific factual information, especially about events that occurred thousands of years ago. Yet the Aboriginal Australian evidence suggests that human memory, when embedded in strong cultural frameworks and maintained through disciplined oral transmission, can preserve geographical information with remarkable accuracy across centuries of generations. The implications extend far beyond Australia to coastal cultures around the world. If Aboriginal traditions can accurately describe drowned landscapes that disappeared 10,000 years ago, what might other indigenous oral traditions tell us about lost lands and vanished civilizations? Could the flood myths that appear in cultures from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica preserve not just symbolic teachings about divine judgment and human frailty, but actual memories of catastrophic sea level changes that reshaped the ancient world? Pacific Islander navigational traditions provide additional evidence for the historical reliability of certain types of oral knowledge. Polynesian wayfinders developed techniques for crossing thousands of miles of open ocean using only observations of stars, waves, and wildlife behavior. These navigational systems, preserved entirely through oral tradition, enabled the settlement of islands scattered across 1/3 of the Earth's surface with a precision that European navigators could not match even with sophisticated instruments. The accuracy of Polynesian navigation depended on detailed knowledge of ocean currents, seasonal weather patterns, and the locations of islands that might be invisible beyond the horizon. Such knowledge could only be maintained through generations of careful observation and precise oral transmission. If Pacific Islander cultures could preserve such complex technical information without written records, they certainly possessed the cultural mechanisms necessary to maintain historical memories of drowned lands and lost civilizations. Inuit traditions from the Arctic provide another compelling example of oral history preserving accurate geographical information across vast time spans. Stories told by the indigenous peoples of Greenland and northern Canada describe landscapes that existed before the medieval warm period, when sea ice patterns and coastal configurations were significantly different from those documented in early European accounts. Some traditions even preserve memories of the medieval settlement attempts by Norse explorers, including details about specific locations and events that were unknown to historians until confirmed by archaeological excavations. The technical precision required to maintain such accurate oral traditions suggests sophisticated mnemonic techniques and cultural institutions dedicated to preserving historical knowledge. Many indigenous cultures developed elaborate storytelling frameworks that embedded factual information within narrative structures designed to aid memory and ensure accurate transmission. Stories were often associated with specific landscapes, seasonal activities, or ceremonial occasions that provided multiple contexts for reinforcing and verifying the information they contained. The transformation of historical memory into mythological narrative may itself represent a preservation strategy rather than a distortion of original facts. By embedding geographical and historical information within stories about supernatural beings, cosmic events, or moral lessons, oral traditions may have ensured their transmission across cultural changes that might otherwise have caused purely factual accounts to be forgotten or dismissed as irrelevant. This perspective suggests a new approach to interpreting flood myths and traditions of lost civilizations. Rather than dismissing them as purely symbolic or fictional, we might treat them as potential repositories of historical information that has been transformed through oral transmission, but retains a core of factual accuracy. The challenge becomes developing methods for distinguishing between symbolic embellishments and preserved historical details. Linguistic analysis offers one promising approach to this challenge. Words and phrases that describe specific geographical features, technological processes, or environmental conditions often resist change more than other aspects of narrative, preserving technical vocabulary that can provide clues to the original contexts in which stories developed. Archaeological correlations provide another line of evidence, allowing researchers to test whether the geographical details embedded in oral traditions correspond to physical evidence from relevant time periods. The global distribution of flood myths takes on new significance when viewed from this perspective. Rather than representing independent symbolic developments in different cultures, these traditions might preserve fragmented memories of actual catastrophic events that affected human populations worldwide during the period of rapid sea level change at the end of the Ice Age. The consistency of certain details across cultures that had no historical contact, the sudden onset of flooding, the survival of small groups who preserved cultural knowledge, the emergence of new landscapes after the waters recede, might reflect shared historical experiences rather than universal psychological archetypes. Indigenous traditions from the Pacific Northwest of North America provide particularly intriguing examples of possible historical memory preserved in mythological form. Stories told by coastal peoples from Alaska to California describe great earthquakes and tsunamis that devastated coastal settlements, forcing survivors to flee to higher ground and rebuild their communities in new locations. Geological evidence confirms that the Pacific Northwest has indeed experienced major seismic events, including massive earthquakes that generated trans-Pacific tsunamis. The temporal precision of some Pacific Northwest traditions is remarkable. Haida stories from the Queen Charlotte Islands include details that correspond to a major earthquake known to have occurred in 1750 CE, while other traditions describe seismic events that may date back several centuries earlier. If oral traditions can preserve accurate information about earthquakes across multiple centuries, they might also maintain memories of the more gradual but equally dramatic changes in sea level that occurred at the end of the Ice Age. Native American traditions from other coastal regions show similar patterns of geographical accuracy embedded within mythological narratives. Algonquin-speaking peoples of the Atlantic coast preserve stories about islands and coastal features that have been documented by underwater archaeologists, but would not have been visible to European observers at the time of first contact. These traditions suggest that indigenous knowledge systems maintain detailed information about submerged landscapes for centuries or even millennia after their disappearance beneath the waves. The preservation of such geographical information in oral traditions becomes even more significant when we consider its implications for archaeological research. If indigenous stories can accurately identify the locations of drowned lands, submerged reefs, and underwater freshwater springs, they might also preserve information about the locations of drowned settlements and lost civilizations. Rather than relying solely on remote sensing and random exploration, underwater archaeologists might be able to use oral traditions as guides to the most promising areas for investigation. This approach would require unprecedented collaboration between indigenous communities and academic researchers, based on mutual respect for both traditional knowledge systems and scientific methodology. Such partnerships are already developing in various parts of the world, as archaeologists recognize that local communities often possess information that can guide and enrich scientific investigation. The ultimate significance of treating myths as potential maps lies not just in their practical value for archaeological research, but in what they reveal about human cultural capabilities and the relationship between memory and landscape. If oral traditions can indeed preserve accurate geographical information across thousands of years, they represent one of humanity's most remarkable intellectual achievements. Technology for storing and transmitting complex information that predates writing by millennia and may be more durable than any written record. As we search for evidence of lost civilizations beneath the world's oceans, the voices of indigenous storytellers may prove to be our most reliable guides. Preserving in the amber of oral tradition the memories of worlds that vanished beneath the waves long before anyone imagined that such memories could survive. In the pre-dawn darkness of the Peruvian Andes, where the air is so thin that stars seem close enough to touch, the massive stone platforms of Sacsayhuaman rise like ancient observatories carved from the living mountain. These precisely fitted megalithic walls, built without mortar, yet so exact that a knife blade cannot slip between the stones, align with startling accuracy to the cardinal directions and key astronomical events. They represent a level of engineering sophistication that challenges conventional understanding of Inca capabilities. But their true mystery may lie not in how they were built, but in what they were designed to observe. Recent research has revealed that many ancient monuments around the world were constructed not merely as temples or fortifications, but as sophisticated astronomical instruments designed to track the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable precision. From Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, from the pyramids of Giza to the medicine wheels of the American plains, ancient builders invested enormous resources in creating structures that served as interfaces between terrestrial and cosmic realms. The sophistication of these ancient astronomical achievements becomes even more intriguing when we consider that similar precision might have been applied to structures now lost beneath the ocean as surface. If prehistoric civilizations possessed the mathematical knowledge and engineering capabilities necessary to align massive stone monuments with stellar positions, they might also have created underwater architectural complexes that preserve similar astronomical relationships, stone calendars, and celestial observatories that now lie hidden beneath the waves. The astronomical alignments found at sites like Newgrange in Ireland demonstrate that prehistoric peoples possessed detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics that required centuries of careful observation to develop. The passage tomb's interior chamber is designed so that sunlight penetrates to its deepest recess only during the winter solstice, creating a dramatic illumination effect that has occurred with clockwork precision for more than 5,000 years. Such accuracy required not only sophisticated understanding of solar movements, but also the engineering expertise to translate that knowledge into precise architectural alignments. Similar astronomical sophistication appears at sites around the world that span thousands of years and diverse cultural traditions. The Maya pyramids of Chichen Itza create shadow effects that mark the spring and fall equinoxes. The stone circles of Nabda Playa in Egypt's western desert appear to map the positions of bright stars as they appeared 6,000 years ago. Even more remarkably, the layout of major monuments at sites like Giza and Angkor appears to mirror the positions of prominent constellations, creating terrestrial maps of the celestial sphere. This pattern of astronomical alignment takes on new significance when we consider the possibility that similar principles might have guided the construction of monuments that are now submerged. The builders of Stonehenge didn't simply create a stone circle, they created a complex astronomical computer that could predict eclipses, track seasonal changes, and maintain accurate calendar systems across centuries. If comparable monuments existed on the continental shelves that were exposed during the Ice Age, they might preserve astronomical information that could help archaeologists understand both their original purpose and their approximate age. The relationship between astronomical knowledge and maritime navigation provides another perspective on how drowned civilizations might have incorporated celestial observations into their architectural traditions. Pacific Islander navigators developed techniques for crossing thousands of miles of open ocean using only observations of star positions, wave patterns, and wildlife behavior. Their traditional knowledge systems included detailed star maps, seasonal calendars, and environmental indicators that enabled precise navigation across vast distances. If the builders of monuments like the Yonaguni Formation off Japan or the stone structures discovered off the coast of India possessed similar astronomical knowledge, their underwater monuments might preserve evidence of sophisticated navigation systems and calendar-keeping traditions. Alignments with rising or setting stars could have served both ceremonial purposes and practical functions for maritime societies that depended on accurate seasonal timing for fishing, trading, and migration activities. The precision required for accurate astronomical alignment also provides a potential tool for dating underwater monuments whose construction periods are otherwise difficult to determine. The Earth's axial precession causes the positions of stars to shift gradually over time, creating a celestial clock that can be used to determine when particular astronomical alignments would have been accurate. If underwater structures show evidence of stellar alignments, archaeologists might be able to calculate their construction dates by determining when the relevant star positions would have matched the monument's orientation. This astronomical dating technique has already been applied to controversial sites like the Giza Pyramid Complex, where some researchers argue that the layout reflects stellar positions that were accurate around 10,500 BCE, rather than the conventional construction date of 2,500 BCE. While such interpretations remain controversial, they demonstrate how astronomical alignments might provide independent evidence for the ages of ancient monuments, including those now submerged beneath the ocean. The global distribution of astronomically aligned monuments also suggests that knowledge of celestial mechanics was more widespread in the ancient world than conventional archaeology has recognized. Sites in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas show similar levels of astronomical sophistication, despite developing in apparent isolation from one another. This pattern might reflect either independent development of astronomical knowledge in multiple regions, or the transmission of such knowledge through trade networks and cultural exchange systems that were more extensive than previously recognized. If advanced astronomical knowledge was indeed widespread in the prehistoric world, it would have been natural for coastal civilizations to incorporate such knowledge into their most important monuments and ceremonial centers. The combination of maritime expertise and astronomical sophistication would have made these societies particularly capable of long-distance navigation, precise calendar keeping, and the kind of urban planning that creates lasting architectural achievements. The preservation of astronomical alignments in underwater monuments would require specific conditions that highlight both the challenges and opportunities of underwater archaeology. Stone structures would need to remain relatively undisturbed by currents, sediment deposition, and seismic activity to preserve their original orientations. However, the same marine environments that pose challenges for exploration might also provide ideal preservation conditions for organic materials, architectural details, and artifact assemblages that could provide crucial information about the astronomical knowledge of their builders. Recent discoveries at underwater sites around the world have begun to reveal evidence that some submerged structures do indeed show signs of deliberate astronomical orientation. Preliminary surveys of the Yonaguni monument have identified features that appear to be aligned with significant solar positions, while structures discovered off the coast of India show orientations that might reflect stellar alignments. While such interpretations remain preliminary and controversial, they suggest that systematic investigation of astronomical alignments in underwater monuments might yield significant insights into both the sophistication and the age of drowned civilizations. The search for astronomical alignments in underwater monuments also requires interdisciplinary collaboration between marine archaeologists, archaeoastronomers, and specialists in ancient navigation techniques. Understanding how prehistoric peoples observed and recorded celestial movements, how they translated such observations into architectural designs, and how such alignments might be preserved in underwater contexts requires expertise that spans multiple fields of study. As underwater exploration technology continues to advance, the ability to identify and measure potential astronomical alignments in submerged structures will undoubtedly improve. High-resolution mapping techniques can reveal architectural details that might indicate deliberate orientation, while computer modeling can test whether such orientations correspond to significant astronomical events. Most importantly, the integration of astronomical analysis with other lines of archaeological evidence might provide the kind of comprehensive interpretation necessary to understand the full significance of humanity as drowned architectural heritage. The stars that guided ancient navigators across trackless oceans continue to wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, indifferent to the rise and fall of the civilizations that once watched them so carefully. But in the precise alignments of stones now resting beneath the sea, those ancient observers may have left us messages written in the language of cosmic geometry, messages that wait for modern explorers with the patience to decode the subtle relationships between stars above and oceans below. Across the vast sweep of human cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, a same story emerges again and again, like a recurring dream that haunts collective memory. In the cedar halls of Mesopotamian temples, scribes carved into clay tablets the epic of Utnapishtim, who built a great vessel to survive waters that covered the earth. Along the sacred banks of the Ganges, Hindu texts preserved the tale of Manu, who was warned by a divine fish to prepare for the cosmic deluge that would end the age. In the smoky lodges of North American tribes, elders spoke of the great flood that forced their ancestors to seek refuge on the highest peaks. From the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia to the Popol Vuh of the Maya, from Norse accounts of the flood that preceded Ragnarok to African tales of waters that rose to cleanse the world, virtually every human culture preserves some version of this fundamental narrative. The universality of flood myths has long puzzled anthropologists and archaeologists, who have struggled to explain how such similar stories could emerge independently in societies that had no contact with one another. The traditional explanation has been psychological and symbolic. Flood myths represent universal human anxieties about divine judgment, natural disaster, and the fragility of civilization. Carl Jung and his followers argued that such stories emerge from deep psychological archetypes that reflect common patterns of human thought and experience. Joseph Campbell traced flood narratives to universal themes of death and rebirth that appear in mythologies around the world. Yet, as our understanding of climate history has deepened, a more intriguing possibility has emerged. What if flood myths are not purely symbolic constructs, but fragmented memories of actual catastrophic events that occurred during the period of rapid climate change at the end of the last ice age? What if the remarkable consistency of these stories across cultures reflects not universal psychology, but shared historical experience? The timeline is compelling. Most flood myths, when they provide chronological frameworks, place their events in a period that corresponds roughly to the end of the Pleistocene epoch, between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. This precisely matches the period when massive ice sheet collapses were causing rapid sea level rise and catastrophic flooding around the world. The geographic distribution is equally suggestive. Flood stories are most common and detailed in coastal regions and river valleys, exactly where rising seas and glacial lake outbursts would have had the greatest impact on human populations. The Mesopotamian flood narratives provide perhaps the most detailed and influential example of how historical memory might be preserved within mythological frameworks. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes not just continuous rainfall, but the breaking of underground springs and the failure of dikes. Technical details that suggest familiarity with actual flood conditions rather than purely imaginative storytelling. The account specifies that the flood lasted 7 days and nights, after which the waters gradually receded and the survivors emerged to find a transformed landscape. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia confirms that the region experienced repeated catastrophic flooding during the period when the flood epics were taking shape. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers changed course multiple times, creating massive floods that destroyed cities and forced population relocations. Most dramatically, the Persian Gulf experienced rapid sea level rise that flooded vast areas of previously dry land, creating the kind of landscape transformation that could easily inspire stories of world-ending deluges. The Hindu flood narratives show similar correspondence with known geological events. The Matsya Purana describes the Pralaya in terms that sound remarkably like eyewitness accounts of glacial lake, outburst floods, the gradual rise of waters, the desperate migration of peoples and animals to higher ground, the preservation of seeds and cultural knowledge for the post-flood world. The geographical details included in these accounts often correspond to regions of northern India that we now know experienced massive flooding as Himalayan glacial lakes burst their barriers during the period of rapid deglaciation. Native American flood traditions from the Pacific Northwest show particularly striking correlations with geological evidence for catastrophic flooding in the region. Stories told by tribes from Alaska to California describe great walls of water that swept away entire communities, forcing survivors to flee to mountaintops and rebuild their societies in new locations. Geological research has confirmed that the region experienced repeated outburst floods from glacial Lake Missoula, creating floods of almost unimaginable magnitude that carved the distinctive landscape of the Columbia River Gorge and deposited massive boulders hundreds of miles from their sources. The precision of some Pacific Northwest flood traditions is remarkable. Maka stories from the Olympic Peninsula describe flooding events that correspond closely to known tsunamis generated by offshore earthquakes. Koinalt traditions preserve details about the 1700 Cascadia earthquake and tsunami that match historical records, kept by Japanese observers across the Pacific. If oral traditions can preserve accurate information about earthquakes and tsunamis across multiple centuries, they might also maintain memories of the more gradual but equally transformative sea level changes that occurred during the post-glacial period. Australian Aboriginal flood stories provide perhaps the most compelling evidence for the historical accuracy of oral traditions about drowned landscapes. Dreamtime narratives from coastal regions describe the formation of islands, the flooding of river valleys, and the creation of reefs and straits with geographical precision that matches what marine archaeology has revealed about sea level changes over the past 15,000 years. Some traditions even specify the depths of underwater features and the locations of freshwater springs that are now beneath the sea. The consistency of certain narrative elements across culturally diverse flood traditions suggests that these stories may preserve genuine historical information despite their mythological embellishment. The theme of divine warning, followed by catastrophic flooding, appears in traditions from around the world, as does the motif of survival through boat building and the preservation of animals, plants, and cultural knowledge. The idea that the flood was preceded by moral corruption and followed by the establishment of a new world order also appears with remarkable frequency across different cultures. Even more intriguingly, many flood traditions include specific details about the geography and timing of the catastrophic events they describe. The biblical flood narrative specifies that the waters rose for 40 days and nights and then receded over a period of months, a timeline that corresponds reasonably well to what we know about meltwater pulse events and glacial lake outburst floods. The Sumerian accounts provide similar temporal frameworks and include details about wind directions, water sources, and the sequence of events during the flood period. The preservation of such specific information across thousands of years of oral transmission suggests sophisticated mnemonic techniques and cultural institutions dedicated to maintaining historical memory. Many traditional societies developed elaborate frameworks for preserving and transmitting important information, using combinations of narrative, song, ritual, and visual arts to ensure accurate transmission across generations. The transformation of historical events into mythological narratives may itself represent a preservation strategy rather than a distortion of original facts. By embedding flood memories within stories about divine intervention and cosmic cycles, oral traditions may have ensured their survival through cultural changes that might otherwise have caused purely historical accounts to be forgotten or dismissed as irrelevant. This perspective suggests that flood myths might serve as a kind of distributed historical archive, preserving in narrative form information about one of the most dramatic periods of environmental change in human history. Rather than treating these stories as purely symbolic or fictional, we might approach them as potential sources of historical information that has been filtered through oral transmission but retains a core of factual accuracy. The implications for understanding lost civilizations are profound. If flood myths preserve genuine memories of catastrophic sea level rise, they might also preserve information about the civilizations that were destroyed by these events. The consistent theme of advanced prehistoric societies being punished by divine flood might reflect actual historical experiences of sophisticated coastal cultures being overwhelmed by rising seas. The stories themselves might contain clues about the locations, characteristics, and ultimate fate of these drowned civilizations. Details about island locations, harbor configurations, architectural features, and cultural practices embedded within flood narratives might provide guidance for underwater archaeological investigations. Rather than searching randomly for evidence of lost civilizations, researchers might be able to use flood myths as maps that point toward the most promising areas for exploration. As we piece together this global web of flood legends, a picture emerges of humanity's deep past that is far more dramatic and traumatic than conventional archaeology has recognized. These stories suggest that our ancestors lived through environmental changes so catastrophic that they reshaped not only the physical world, but human consciousness itself, creating collective memories so powerful that they continue to influence human culture thousands of years after the events they commemorate. In the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, where limestone blocks weigh as much as modern locomotives and fit together with precision that challenges contemporary engineering, a provocative question whispers through the desert wind. What if these monuments were not the first achievements of Egyptian civilization, but the last desperate projects of survivors from an even older world? What if the remarkable sudden appearance of sophisticated architecture, complex writing systems, and advanced astronomical knowledge in ancient Egypt reflects not local innovation, but the arrival of refugees carrying the cultural treasures of a drowned homeland? The conventional narrative of civilization's emergence depicts human societies developing gradually from simple hunter-gatherer bands to complex urban centers over thousands of years of slow cultural evolution. Yet archaeological evidence from around the world suggests a different pattern: the relatively sudden appearance of sophisticated technologies and cultural achievements that seem to have no clear local precedents. This phenomenon appears most dramatically in the great river valleys of Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and China, where complex civilizations emerged with startling rapidity around 5,000 years ago. The timing of this global flowering of civilization corresponds precisely with the final stages of post-glacial sea level rise, when the last remnants of Ice Age coastlines were being submerged beneath rising oceans. Could this timing be more than coincidental? Could the sudden emergence of civilization in inland river valleys reflect the displacement of sophisticated coastal populations who were forced to abandon their drowned homelands and establish new settlements in more secure locations? The evidence from ancient Egypt is particularly intriguing in this regard. The earliest phases of pharaonic civilization display a level of architectural, artistic, and intellectual sophistication that seems to appear fully formed without clear developmental stages. The Step Pyramid of Djoser, built around 2650 BCE, represents not primitive experimentation, but mature mastery of complex engineering principles. The sophisticated astronomical alignments of the Giza pyramids suggest detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics that would have required centuries of careful observation to develop. Even more remarkably, ancient Egyptian texts preserve references to the first time, Zep Tepi, a golden age when the gods ruled directly on earth and established the foundations of Egyptian civilization. These accounts describe this primordial period as a time of advanced technology, perfect social order, and direct communication between humans and divine beings. While mainstream Egyptology interprets these references as purely mythological, they might preserve genuine historical memories of an earlier civilization whose achievements provided the foundation for later pharaonic culture. The Mesopotamian evidence shows similar patterns of sophisticated achievement appearing with apparent suddenness. The Sumerian civilization emerged around 3500 BCE with fully developed writing systems, complex urban planning, advanced metallurgy, and mathematical concepts that included positional notation and sophisticated geometric relationships. Sumerian texts describe the antediluvian period, the time before the Great Flood, as an era when divine beings called the Anunnaki brought civilization to humanity, teaching agriculture, architecture, and the arts of government. The Sumerian king list, one of the earliest historical documents, describes rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods before the flood, followed by more modest reigns afterward. While these extended reigns are usually dismissed as mythological exaggeration, they might preserve memories of different systems of timekeeping or cultural continuity from an earlier period. The abrupt transition from pre-flood to post-flood rulers in the king list could reflect the disruption caused by catastrophic sea level rise and the subsequent need to rebuild civilization in new locations. The Indus Valley Civilization presents perhaps the most mysterious example of sophisticated achievement appearing without clear precedents. The urban centers of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro display advanced city planning, sophisticated water management systems, and standardized weights and measures that suggest a mature technological tradition. Yet the civilization appears in the archaeological record around 2500 BCE without obvious developmental stages, flourishes for nearly 1,000 years, and then disappears almost as suddenly as it emerged. The drainage systems of Indus Valley cities are particularly remarkable, featuring covered sewers, public wells, and private bathrooms that would not be matched in other parts of the world for millennia. Such sophisticated urban infrastructure suggests engineering knowledge that would have required extensive experience with water management, exactly the kind of expertise that would have been essential for coastal civilizations, dealing with changing sea levels and flood control. Recent underwater archaeological discoveries off the coast of India have revealed submerged structures that may predate the Indus Valley civilization by thousands of years. The site at Dwarka, associated in Hindu tradition with the golden city of Krishna, shows evidence of sophisticated harbor engineering and urban planning that might represent the maritime predecessors of the later inland civilizations. If such coastal settlements were indeed the source of the technological knowledge displayed by the Indus Valley cities, their submersion could explain both the sudden appearance and eventual disappearance of this enigmatic civilization. The global distribution of megalithic architecture provides additional evidence for possible connections between drowned coastal civilizations and later inland achievements. Massive stone construction techniques appear around the world during the period of post-glacial sea level rise, often in locations that show no clear developmental sequence leading to such sophisticated engineering. The precision of megalithic construction at sites like Stonehenge, the Maltese temples, and Sacsayhuaman suggests shared technological knowledge that might have been transmitted by displaced populations, carrying advanced building techniques from drowned homelands. Linguistic evidence also supports the possibility of large-scale population movements during the period of post-glacial flooding. The spread of major language families Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan appears to have accelerated during the period when rising seas were transforming coastal landscapes around the world. Rather than representing purely internal cultural development, these linguistic expansions might reflect the migration of displaced populations who carried their languages to new territories as their original homelands disappeared beneath the waves. Genetic studies of ancient populations provide another line of evidence for significant population movements during the post-glacial period. DNA analysis of early agricultural populations in Europe, Asia, and the Americas reveals complex patterns of migration and admixture that suggest multiple waves of population movement during the period when sea levels were rising. These genetic signatures might represent the dispersal of coastal populations forced to abandon their drowned settlements and integrate with inland communities. The agricultural revolution itself, the transition from hunting and gathering to food production that enabled the development of complex civilizations, might reflect the displacement of coastal populations who were forced to develop new subsistence strategies as their marine resources became inaccessible. The remarkably rapid spread of agricultural techniques around the world during the post-glacial period could represent the transmission of knowledge by refugee populations rather than independent local development. Maritime technologies also show patterns of sophisticated achievement that might reflect the survival and transmission of knowledge from drowned coastal civilizations. The navigation techniques developed by Polynesian seafarers, the boat-building traditions of northern European peoples, and the harbor engineering capabilities of ancient Mediterranean civilizations all suggest advanced maritime knowledge that seems to appear without clear developmental stages in the archaeological record. The preservation of advanced knowledge through periods of cultural disruption has historical precedents that support the plausibility of survivor populations transmitting the achievements of drowned civilizations. The Library of Alexandria preserved Greek learning through the collapse of classical civilization. Islamic scholars maintained and developed scientific knowledge during the European Dark Ages. Monastic communities preserved literacy and scholarship through periods of political chaos. If coastal civilizations possessed advanced knowledge systems before their submersion, survivor populations might have established similar preservation institutions in their new inland settlements. The mystery schools of ancient civilizations, the priestly colleges that maintained astronomical and mathematical knowledge, and the craft guilds that preserved technical expertise might all represent institutional structures designed to safeguard the cultural achievements of earlier societies. The alternative interpretation of civilization as emergence as the work of survivors from drowned coastal settlements rather than purely local development requires us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about human cultural capacity and the continuity of technological traditions. Rather than viewing the sophisticated achievements of ancient civilizations as remarkable innovations, we might see them as the preservation and adaptation of even older knowledge systems that developed during the more favorable climatic conditions of the Ice Age. This perspective suggests that our understanding of human prehistory may be fundamentally incomplete, missing entire chapters of cultural development that occurred on continental shelves, now buried beneath hundreds of feet of water and sediment. The civilizations whose monuments we admire today might represent not the beginning of human achievement, but its continuation after a catastrophic interruption that erased the original homeland and forced its inheritors to rebuild their world from fragmentary memories and salvage knowledge. As we search the ocean depths for evidence of these hypothetical parent civilizations, we carry with us the possibility that their most important legacy may not be the ruins we hope to discover, but the knowledge systems they passed down through survivor population systems that became the foundation for everything we recognize as the beginning of recorded history. Beyond the concrete questions of archaeological evidence and geological processes, beyond the debate over specific underwater ruins and flood, myth's Atlantis has transcended its origins in Plato's dialogues to become something far more powerful than any single lost city could ever be. It has become humanity's most enduring symbol for the fundamental truths about civilization itself, that all human achievements are temporary, that hubris inevitably leads to downfall, and that the line between greatness and catastrophe is often thinner than we dare to imagine. In Plato's original telling, Atlantis was never meant to inspire treasure hunters or fuel speculation about ancient astronauts. It was a moral fable, a cautionary tale about the corruption of power and the inevitable consequences of abandoning virtue for material wealth and military conquest. The Atlanteans began as noble and wise, blessed by the gods with abundant resources and perfect governance. But over generations, their divine nature faded as they intermarried with mortals, and their hearts turned from wisdom to ambition, from justice to conquest. This moral dimension of the Atlantis story has resonated across cultures and centuries because it speaks to universal human experiences. Every civilization has witnessed the rise and fall of powers that seemed permanent in their time. Every generation has seen empires that appeared unshakable crumble into dust and memory. The lesson of Atlantis is not that catastrophic floods will punish the wicked, but that no human achievement, however magnificent, is immune to the forces of change and decay. The symbol has proven remarkably adaptable to different historical contexts and cultural concerns. During the Renaissance, when European explorers were discovering new continents and encountering unknown civilizations, Atlantis became a template for understanding cultural contact and the possibility that advanced societies might exist beyond the edges of the known world. The Spanish conquistadors, who encountered the sophisticated civilizations of the Americas, saw their discoveries through the lens of Atlantean mythology, interpreting indigenous achievements as evidence of old world connections or even direct descendants from Plato's Lost Island. The Enlightenment transformed Atlantis into a symbol of reason and scientific progress, a hypothetical society that had achieved the perfect balance between technological advancement and social harmony. Utopian philosophers used Atlantean imagery to envision ideal societies where human nature had been perfected through education and rational governance. The story's emphasis on natural catastrophe rather than moral failure appealed to an age that was beginning to understand the power of geological and climatic forces to reshape human history. The Romantic movement invested Atlantis with new emotional resonance, transforming it from a rational allegory into a symbol of lost innocence and the tragic beauty of vanished worlds. Romantic poets and artists saw in the drowned civilization a reflection of their own sense that something essential had been lost in the transition to modernity, that industrial progress had come at the cost of spiritual and aesthetic wholeness. The image of magnificent temples and palaces lying silent beneath the waves became a metaphor for all the ways that mechanization and urbanization had severed humanity's connection to nature and tradition. The 20th century brought new dimensions to Atlantean symbolism as global wars and technological revolutions demonstrated humanity's capacity for both unprecedented achievement and catastrophic destruction. The development of nuclear weapons gave sudden urgency to ancient warnings about the consequences of unchecked power. The image of an advanced civilization destroying itself in a single day and night no longer seemed like distant mythology, but like an all too plausible scenario for humanity's own future. Environmental movements have embraced Atlantis as a symbol of ecological hubris, a warning about the consequences of treating the natural world as an inexhaustible resource to be exploited without regard for long-term consequences. In this interpretation, the divine punishment that destroyed Atlantis represents the Earth's response to civilizations that exceed the carrying capacity of their environments. The rising seas that claimed the island become a metaphor for climate change, species extinction, and all the ways that human activity might ultimately undermine the conditions necessary for civilization itself. Modern urban planners and architects have found in Atlantis a template for thinking about ideal city design, drawing inspiration from Plato's description of concentric rings of land and water, sophisticated harbor facilities, and the integration of urban development with natural landscapes. The planned cities of the 20th century, from Brasilia to Canberra, echo Atlantean themes of rational design and the attempt to create perfect human environments through conscious planning rather than organic growth. The digital age has given Atlantis new relevance as a symbol for virtual worlds and the possibility that entire civilizations might exist in purely information-based forms. The image of a sophisticated society that vanished without leaving physical traces resonates with contemporary concerns about the fragility of digital culture and the possibility that entire libraries of human knowledge might disappear with the failure of storage systems or the obsolescence of file formats. Perhaps most profoundly, Atlantis has become a symbol for the unknown itself, for all the possibilities that lie hidden beneath the surface of our everyday reality. In an age when satellite imagery can map every square kilometer of the Earth's surface, and GPS systems can locate any position with meter-level accuracy, the idea that entire continents of human achievement might remain undiscovered appeals to our deep need for mystery and wonder. Atlantis represents the hope that there are still secrets to be uncovered, still frontiers to be explored, still ways that the future might surprise us with revelations about the past. The psychological appeal of lost civilizations reflects fundamental aspects of human consciousness that transcend specific cultural contexts or historical periods. The desire to believe that we are not the first to achieve greatness, that other societies have faced similar challenges and perhaps found better solutions, speaks to both humility and hope. If advanced civilizations have existed before and failed, it suggests that our own achievements are part of a larger pattern that encompasses both success and catastrophe. If they succeeded in ways we have not yet discovered, it suggests possibilities for human development that we have not yet explored. The recurring pattern of advanced societies being destroyed by natural catastrophes also reflects deep psychological truths about the relationship between human ambition and natural forces. No matter how sophisticated our technologies become, we remain vulnerable to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, climate change, and cosmic events that operate on scales and timelines that dwarf human planning and control. The myth of Atlantis acknowledges this vulnerability while simultaneously celebrating the impulse to build, create, and achieve despite the certainty that all human works are ultimately temporary. In the context of our current global civilization, with its unprecedented technological capabilities and equally unprecedented capacity for self-destruction, Atlantis serves as both warning and inspiration. The warning is clear that no society, however advanced, is immune to the consequences of its own actions or the larger forces that shape planetary history. The inspiration is subtler but equally important, that the human drive to create meaning, beauty, and knowledge persists despite the knowledge that all achievements are temporary. As we stand at the edge of our own uncertain future, facing challenges that range from climate change to artificial intelligence to the possibility of interplanetary expansion, the symbol of Atlantis reminds us that we are part of a story larger than any individual civilization. Whether or not Plato's island ever existed as a physical place, it exists as a permanent part of human consciousness, a reminder that greatness and fragility are inseparable. That wisdom lies in recognizing both our capabilities and our limitations, and that the most important human achievements may be those that survive the civilizations that created them. The search for physical evidence of Atlantis may ultimately matter less than the search for the qualities that the symbol represents. The courage to build, knowing that what we build will not last forever. The wisdom to create beauty and meaning in the face of impermanence. And the hope that some essence of human achievement will survive even the most complete catastrophes. In this sense, Atlantis is not a lost civilization to be found, but a living ideal to be pursued. Not a mystery to be solved, but a mirror in which to see both the promise and the peril of human ambition. In 1954, construction workers digging a foundation for a new building in the heart of London made a discovery that seemed to defy the logic of geography and time. 30 feet beneath the bustling streets of the modern city, they uncovered the perfectly preserved remains of a Roman merchant vessel, complete with its cargo of pottery, wine amphorae, and bronze fittings. The ship lay not along the Thames, where Roman vessels might be expected, but in what had been dry land for nearly 2 millennia, buried beneath layers of urban development that had accumulated like sedimentary rock over the centuries. The London ship was not an isolated anomaly. Across Europe, the Mediterranean, and other regions where sea levels and river courses have shifted over time, archaeologists have discovered vessels in locations that seem impossibly distant from navigable water. In the deserts of Egypt, Bedouin guides occasionally report finding the ribs of ancient boats protruding from sand dunes hundreds of kilometers from the nearest sea. Near Rome, construction projects have unearthed Roman galleys buried beneath what are now busy highways and residential neighborhoods. These discoveries serve as powerful reminders that the relationship between land and sea, between navigable and impassable, is far more fluid than our modern experience suggests. Rivers change course, harbors silt up, sea levels rise and fall, and what was once a thriving port can become a landlocked archaeological site. The ships that now rest in desert sand or urban foundations are monuments to the impermanence of geography and the way human activity adapts to and is shaped by environmental change. The London ship tells a particularly evocative story about the transformation of urban landscapes over time. During the Roman period, the Thames was wider, deeper, and followed a slightly different course than it does today. The vessel was likely moored at a wharf that served the bustling commercial district of Romang Londinium, unloading goods from across the empire to supply the growing city's markets and workshops. But as the Romang Empire declined and the city's population shrank, the river began to change. Medieval Londoners gradually filled in portions of the Roman waterfront to create more building space, using rubble from abandoned buildings and household waste to extend the shoreline further into the river. Over centuries, this process pushed the Thames several hundred meters away from its Roman banks, leaving former harbor areas high and dry. The Romang ship, once floating in the heart of London's commercial district, found itself buried beneath layers of medieval and post-medieval development, preserved in the anaerobic clay that had once been river mud. The ship as cargo provides a snapshot of Roman commercial networks that spanned continents and connected cultures across vast distances. Wine amphorae bore stamps indicating their origins in Spain and southern France. Pottery vessels showed styles that originated in North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean. Bronze fittings demonstrated the sophisticated metallurgical techniques that Roman craftsmen used to create durable, functional hardware for maritime use. This archaeological time capsule, preserved accidentally by urban development, offers insights into Roman London that would be impossible to obtain from historical documents alone. The ship's construction techniques reveal information about Roman shipbuilding traditions, while its cargo illuminates the complex trade networks that sustained urban life throughout the empire. Even more remarkably, organic materials that would have decayed in most archaeological contexts survived in the waterlogged conditions beneath London's streets. providing rare evidence of wooden artifacts, rope, and textile fragments from the Roman period. The discovery also highlights the role that accidental preservation plays in shaping our understanding of the past. The Roman ship survived not because anyone intended to preserve it for future study, but because specific environmental conditions waterlogged clay, protection from oxygen, stable temperatures created an ideal preservation environment. The same processes that buried and protected the London ship might have preserved evidence of human activity in underwater contexts around the world. Similar stories emerge from other locations where changing water levels have transformed the relationship between archaeological sites and their environments. In the Mediterranean, ancient harbors now lie beneath modern cities, their stone quays and warehouse foundations incorporated into the foundations of later buildings. The famous Pozzuoli harbor near Naples has been alternately above and below sea level multiple times over the past 2 millennia due to volcanic activity, creating a complex archaeological record that can only be understood in the context of geological processes that operate on both human and geological timescales. The Egyptian desert ships present an even more dramatic example of how environmental change can transform archaeological contexts. During certain periods of ancient Egyptian history, arms of the Nile extended much further into what is now desert, creating waterways that supported boat traffic hundreds of kilometers from the modern river. When climate patterns changed and these channels dried up, the vessels that once navigated them were left stranded in sand that gradually accumulated around them, creating the desert ship.